Fate. Souls and Singularities by Mundatorem Chapter 66-68. Chapter 66. Past reflections. Sigurd approached Asterios with the bowl of Estus soup in his hands. The Onion Knight showing very little in the way of fear as he closed the distance with the larger berserker. "Hello, my large fellow." Asterios blinked, looking away from Euryale and towards Sigurd. "I hope I am not being too presumptuous, but I believed you could do with a nice bowl of Estus soup." Asterios continued to stare at him as Sigurd held the small wooden bowl out in front of him in offering. "I realize we servants might not need to eat, but I find that nothing warms the soul quite like a good meal." He paused before continuing on, "Well, I will warn you that Estus doesn't have much of a taste, but it still warms you regardless." Still staring at the soup, the berserker hesitantly reached out and gently clasped the underside of the bowl before removing it from Sigurd's hands. The knight gave a single, clearly pleased, nod and took a step backwards. "I hope you enjoy. Not my finest work as I was in a rush, but I just couldn't leave without offering it to someone." Looking away from the Minotaur, he turned his attention to Euryale and bowed his head slightly. "I offer you a good day, Lady Goddess." She remained stone-faced before cracking a satisfied smile. "Another who knows how to treat a goddess. I wish there were more of you." "Ha ha ha ha." Sigurd let out a boisterous laugh in response. "I find that the hand of greeting is one that should be forever offered first." His laughter died down as he stared at his feet, now gradually becoming transparent. "I seem to have run out of time here." A sigh escaped from his throat. "Oh well." Turning his attention back to Asterios, he gave a final wave of his hands. "Farewell, and before I forget, might I hear your name?" "Asterios." The berserker replied. "Asterios." Sigurd nodded to himself. "Farewell, Asterios. I wish you great luck ahead of you." He vanished completely, the summoning coming undone and returning him to Chaldea. Asterios stared at the spot Sigurd had been before looking down at the soup in front of him. His lips slowly curved itself into a faint smile. "He was nice." "Quite loud," Euryale offered in comment, then looked down at the soup and frowned. "Is it supposed to be glowing?" Asterios shrugged, moving his hand to grab onto the spoon, which appeared to be comically small in comparison, and taking a small helping of the glowing soup onto it before lifting it towards his mouth. The Minotaur took a small sip of the soup before lowering the spoon and staring at the soup. The berserker stared at the soup and smiled. "Warm." Confirming return of Sigurd to Chaldea, Romani informed the group as he stared at a monitor to his left. "Leo is telling me that he looks fine, so." He sent a smile to Ritsuka. "Looks like we've got another type of summoning system available to us right now, Fujimaru-kun. It's only short term, however." Olga spoke up from behind Romani, leaning over the desk. "So use it sparingly and only for quick tasks. Unless we can get it to last longer," Romani pointed out. "Although right now we're limited to servants, so we'd still need Mash's shield if we wanted to send supplies down to you." "All right." Ritsuka nodded, then looked over to Drake. "Did we get what we needed?" "I'd say so." Drake scratched her chin. "Weird guy. I liked him." She snorted, said we should try using the wyvern scales to fix my ship. The captain looked over to the pile of corpses. "I mean, we got a good few of them here." Romani cupped his chin. "It is actually a very good suggestion. The scales of animals like wyvern are certainly going to be stronger than the wooden planks you originally used, not to mention they'd be lighter than steel." Ritsuka hummed. "So we can use the wyvern scales." He nodded. "Sounds like a good plan. Do we have anyone who knows how to skin a wyvern?" The master paused midway through his sentence and slowly turned towards their resident berserker. "Havel," he called out, the man a good few feet from them and still dragging the corpses towards the pile. "Him?" The berserker grunted and looked towards him. "Do you know how to skin a wyvern?" Havel tilted his head in a questioning manner before giving a quick nod. "That's good." Ritsuka smiled. "We're going to use the scales to fix the ship." He gestured to the bodies. "So, I don't suppose you could show us how to skin them?" Havel stared at him. "You're helping?" Ritsuka shrugged. "Well, I'm technically a part of Drake's crew." He sent a knowing look towards the captain. "And I think she wouldn't let me get away without doing something to help repair her ship." Drake snorted. "You're no cook and you sure as hell don't look like you touched a sword in your life." Ritsuka nodded his head unashamedly. "Yeah, so I figured I'd help where I could." "Skin. Eh." Wyverns. Havel let out a quiet hum. Fie. Nay. Throwing down the wyvern body onto the pile with a heavy thud, he turned his body towards Ritska. Will. Need. Knife. Ritska nodded his head before looking around, soon finding his target, Ash. The unkindled turned towards him and raised his eyebrow. Yes, Ritska? Do you have any knives on you? Do you refer to enchanted or common? He asked, because I have both. We need to skin wyverns. He replied, so probably a sharp one. He paused. That won't do too much damage. Ash nodded his head and moved his hand towards his bottomless box. I'm certain I have something to accommodate. Sanora peered around Ash's shoulder and stared at the box. Is that a bottomless box? Yes. I've never seen one before. She spoke in a hushed tone full of awe. Is it really bottomless? Ash stared at her out of the corner of his eye. Something like that, yes. He replied casually. I've never seen the end of it, but I assume it is bottomless, or at the very least very expansive. Sanora nodded her head. How many spears do you have? A few. He non-committally answered as he withdrew 2 curved knives from the box. The main blade was simple steel, with the handle was made of thin wood with old fabric wrappings around it. Holding them up to show Ritska and Havel, bandit knife. Havel wordlessly approached the unkindled, reaching down and snatching one of the knives from Ash's hand and looking it over in his grip. He lifted his other hand to the blade and ran it along his finger before staring at it. Grunting, he nodded his head. Will. Do. Turning around, he casually threw the knife handle first towards Ritska. The boy let out a startled gasp as he juggled the knife in his hands before tightly clutching the handle. Staring at him, he flattened his expression. Couldn't you have just passed it to me? Yes. Havel admitted easily, taking the other knife from Ash's grip, but didn't. He moved away from the unkindled and towards pile of wyvern bodies. Now, come. Sanora stared at Havel's retreating figure and then looked up at Ash. He seems more antagonistic than I was expecting him to be, she whispered. It's likely just because it's me. Ash admitted without much hesitation, then turned his head towards the other rival. I'm still curious as to how those two came about to be here. Milady Artemis and her muse? Sanora tilted her head. I did not seek to inquire. I was already present on this island when they arrived. She paused for a few moments. I've been hunting the wyverns present on the island. Ash nodded his head. I shall assume you were still hunting them when you happened upon Artemis and Fu? I heard a cry for help in the woods. Sanora replied, thumping her fist into her chest. As a knight, it was my duty to investigate. Her tone was full of confidence which utterly failed to elicit any major reaction from Ash. The woman's posture faltered before she reached up and scratched the back of the helmet. I met Milady Artemis while I was searching for the distress, and she informed me she was a goddess, and I vowed to help her as best I could. Wasn't what you were expecting? Sanora fidgeted on the spot, hesitantly looking in the direction of Artemis before turning back to Ash. She's very enthusiastic, the girl whispered before waving her hands. And not that I am complaining, she hastily added on. She is free to express herself in any way she sees fit. I'm just a humble knight. Ash hummed and shrugged. Well, it is not my concern. If you wish to swear yourself to her covenant of, he frowned. Orion, he called out. Yeah, the bear poked its head up and called back to him. Is Artemis the leader of a covenant? Huh? The bear blinked. Well, she's the goddess of the moon and hunters. Also chastity. Why? Ash turned to Sanora. You can join her covenant of moonhunters. He furrowed his brow. That is probably what it is called, unless you already have an affiliation with a covenant. I was never inducted into a covenant. Sanora replied with a hint of regret. My duties kept me to the cathedral for the most part, therefore I would have been a poor fit in the way of blue. She turned her head towards Artemis, but I do not know if she would have me. I already am devoted to the old sun god. Ash shrugged. It is your decision. He replied as he turned away. You should not feel compelled to choose. I would suggest you make yourself a disciple of a covenant which will provide you with a worthwhile duty to perform. Sanora crossed her arms and hummed, her helmet facing downwards slightly. I will think upon this, my thanks, sir. I'm not a knight. Ash shook his head. I'm just Ash. Warrior Ash then. She nodded her head in acknowledgement. I thank you for this advice. Then paused. Could I also have a knife? She inquired with an air of trepidation about her. Ash wordlessly reached into his box and unveiled a simple dagger before handing it to her. "Thank you, I will return this." The Lancer quickly made her way to where Ritska and Havel were already preparing themselves for skinning the wyverns. Ash let out a hum as he turned away just in time to see Orion waddle past him. The two stared at each other for a few moments before the bear tilted his head. "What? I am a master hunter. You know, skinning animals is kind of what I do." Ash stared harder. "I'm obviously not going to pick up the knife myself." Orion deadpanned at him. "I'd make a terrible job of it, but I can at least walk the kid through the steps so he doesn't mess up." Ash gave a half nod to him and allowed him to move on with his business. "Handing out weapons to the new servants, are we?" Archer asked as he stopped behind Ash, holding a bundle of branches under one arm, "and allowing them so close to your master?" If she wanted him dead, she could just as easily use her spear. Ash pointed out evenly, and attempting to kill him while in the presence of Havel would be a poor idea. Her reverence for him and Artemis is obvious, and with the latter obviously having some mildly positive connection to him, he trailed off. "True," Archer admitted easily, "but that does not mean she isn't lying about being non-hostile. It's possible she's just waiting for the right opportunity." Ash furrowed his brows. "Do you believe it likely?" "No," Archer shook his head, "but that does not mean I would dismiss the notion so easily." He frowned. "You have a trend of accepting the words gifted to you at face value." "Probably." Ash agreed with a shrug, "but I have not encountered many liars, so I do not have much experience to discern a person's true nature at a glance." "I'd recommend you learn that skill quickly," Archer advised as he strolled past the unkindled. "Lying is a very useful skill to have, either as the liar or as one to see through them." Ash just hummed in response. "First things first, you're probably gonna want to cover up your face." Ritska blinked, then took on a slightly worried look. "Why? Am I going to be inhaling hazardous materials or something?" Orion blinked at him. "You're going to be sticking your hand into a wyvern's gut and taking out his organs, mainly his stomach and whatnot." The bear grimaced. "I ain't gonna sugarcoat it for you, kid. It's gonna stink something nasty, and considering it's probably your first time doing something like this, it would probably be a good idea for you to, you know, not throw up all over the body." "Oh." Ritska cringed. "Right. Yes, that makes sense." "Worry not." He looked up to see Sanora take a seat upon the log opposite and only a few feet from Havel. The berserker's helmet turned slightly in her direction before the bishop returned to skinning his own wyvern. "I have much experience in the act of slaying wyverns and their ilk. It is simple." Orion stared at her with a look of suspicion. "You ever actually skinned one of them though?" The lion-headed knight remained stationary for a few moments before releasing a nervous chuckle. "It can't be that complex, no?" "Depends if you want it done right or not." Orion huffed, crossing his arms and shaking his head. "Why did she have to hijack my summoning again? I could swear it was a work summoning this time as well." He shrugged. "Oh well." Turning towards Havel, Orion waved his small hand in Sanora's direction. "Don't suppose you could walk her through it? Feel like I'll have my hands full with the kid?" Havel slowly turned to look at him. "I do it myself, but..." He shivered and looked over his shoulder with a hint of dread. He caught sight of Artemis staring at him while stirring a cooking pot. The goddess gave him a smile. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a, "I know what you're thinking and it won't end well if you try it," smile. "Let's just say I'm under watchful management." Orion struggled out, turning back to see the berserker look up from him and towards Artemis. "Goddess?" Havel grunted, tilting his head. Moon?" "Yeah." Orion gave a small thumbs up. She's the light of my life." He sighed. "She also very much likes to remind me of that." "HMPH." Havel grunted, looking back down at his wyvern as he began to peel the skin away from the chest area. "Fi, nay." He grunted, nodding his head towards Sanora. "What? Closely. I will keep my eyes entirely focused, Sir Havel." Sanora passionately exclaimed, "You needn't worry. I will endeavor to copy your movements exactly." Havel released a barely concealed snort of something, like, "Young Ornstein," he muttered to himself. Orion turned around and waddled towards Ritska as the boy held the knife in his hands. "This guy looks like a bundle of fun." The bear muttered quietly to him. "I'd rather the snake-footed guy, if I'm honest. Mainly because he'd probably keep Artemis distracted so I could make my moves on the knightess." Ritzka's lip twitched upwards as he amusedly shook his head at Orion's antics. I'm sure she'd still manage to figure you out even with Gwendolyn here. You're probably right too. Orion sighed. Well, no sense worrying about that, right? He let out a laugh. You've got a lizard to gut, kid. I feel kind of special that I get to walk you through your first time. Yeah, I know, Orion sighed. Let's just. Yep. Ritzka coughed and looked away, didn't say anything weird, nothing at all. Thanks, kid. The bear gave a grateful nod of his, appreciate it. Oscar grunted as he dropped the next barrel onto the ground, turning away and looking out across the beach as the other crew members began to set up tents for themselves to sleep in. The man frowned behind his helmet, soon reaching up and unclasping it from around his chin and lifting to off to reveal his face to the outside air. Are the repairs to take so long? He pondered aloud. Depends. He blinked, turning around and seeing Boudica with a smile on her face as she descended down the ramp after him with a barrel of supplies of her own resting on her shoulder. I know we're going to be using some of the wyvern scales. She trailed off and stared towards Ritzka and the others with a bemused look. Looks as though Master wants to get a more hands-on experience. Oscar followed her gaze and saw the Master with a knife in his hands struggling to cut open a wyvern, pausing every few moments and looking away to heave before getting back on with the task. Orion was by his feet continually shouting out encouragement. It seems he wishes to take a more active role then. Oscar's lip curved slightly, perhaps he feels guilty that he has not taken on as big a role as the others. He wondered to himself. Boudica gave a hum behind him. Maybe, but he shouldn't feel the need to. She placed the barrel down as she reached the bottom of the ramp and stepped onto the beach. He's already doing quite a lot for a master, even helping Drake with her crew. A gentle laugh bubbled its way from her throat. I can imagine most other mages wouldn't be as willing to help. Perhaps, Oscar gave a hum. Still, I wish him luck. Gutting is no easy task. He joked. I remember my first fish. I complained to my father about the smell and the feeling of it. Shaking his head, he leaned over and rested his arms on the top of the barrel. My father told me that fish was the one I would be eating for supper that night, and if I made a poor job of it then it would only hurt me. Boudica raised an eyebrow. Did you get it right? Oscar released a huff of amusement. Not entirely, it tasted disgusting. I hadn't cooked it properly and there were still traces the insides and I kept spitting out bones. The knight exhaled. Father told me that I would eat every fish I caught and filleted until I got it right. How long did it take you? Boudica asked, tilting her head to the side and crossing her arms. Oscar frowned and let out a thoughtful hum. I believe it took me a little over 3 weeks to get it just right. He remained silent before giving a confident nod. Yes, 3 weeks. As it turns out, it provides a good incentive for betterment if you are consuming your own catch. But I got it in the end. He smiled. By the time I was 16, Father said I was on my road to be the best fisherman in the village. Boudica looked him up and down pointedly. Oscar noticed the look and let out a mirthless chuckle. Yes, clearly I wasn't content with being a humble fisherman. He gave a sad smile. Father wasn't disappointed in me though. I remember my induction into the Knights. I'd rarely seen him smile so widely. I'd even promised I'd make him proud. He removed his helmet from the lid of the barrel and placed it back upon his head, hiding away his face. Shame I never did. He quietly muttered to himself, leaning down and heaving the barrel back onto his shoulder. Fishermen surrounded by kings and dragon slayers. Boudica watched him in silence, her eyes crinkled slightly at his self-depreciating comments before she spoke up. You managed to get into the throne, she pointed out with a smile, not bad for a fisherman. Oscar paused, remaining stationary for a few moments before he spoke again. Well, perhaps I'd achieved one worthwhile deed. Setting a better man on a righteous path. He marched away from her and towards the other gathering of crew members and pirates. Boudica stared at Oscar's retreating form with a sad frown. She made to follow when the ship behind her lurched forwards. The woman span around and gaped as she saw it slowly push itself further onto the beach front, knocking the ramp down from the side of the ship and onto the sand with a heavy thud which sent up a small cloud of sand. The rider took a few steps backwards as ship continued to crawl up the beach until it was completely out of the water. Heavy footfalls and splashing had her turn her head towards the back of the ship just in time to see Asterios appear. The berserker froze when he caught sight of Boudica's flat look. Drake asked you to move the ship, didn't she? Asterios nodded his head once. So you decided to do so immediately after she asked you? Another nod. Boudica released an exasperated sigh and gave a shake of her head. All right then, not much we can do about that now. She looked at the ship, noticing how it was leaning to one side more than the other. We'll need some supports so it doesn't fall over though. Nodding her head over to the forest, she began to walk in that direction. Come on. MHH. Asterios hummed in affirmation and followed after the woman, still wearing a self-satisfied smile on his face from being able to help. Also the lingering effects of the strange glowing soup still made him feel happy, along with the strange positivity of the servant who had visited. 'Tis hardly much of a surprise her sister would be identical, Gwyndolin affirmed to himself as he spoke with Euryale. Indeed, the physical similarities between thyself and thy sister art close indeed. The god of the dark moon hummed as he moved to cup his chin. Thy relation with the Lady Steno. His voice took on an odd note to it. 'Tis good, no? Euryale raised an eyebrow. Naturally. I love myself and therefore I would also love me. We are both perfect in form, so it would be strange to dislike my own image. Gwyndolin gave a gentle laugh. Indeed. 'T would be most peculiar to dislike one's own image. His laugh tapered off, his head looking away from them. Most peculiar indeed. Have thou any other siblings? Just a younger sister. Euryale replied with a gentle giggle, although she isn't anything like me and myself. Far too grotesque to be perfect. She snorted. I mean, why does she have to be so tall? And what was with those overtly large breasts of hers? Gwyndolin stared at her in complete silence. 'Tis her only disfigurement? He quizzed with a slightly distant tone. Euryale blinked before her lips thinned out. Well, that's how I remember her anyway. The goddess easily answered, although Gwyndolin felt as though she was leaving something important out. When it came to lies, she wasn't very good at it. Or not as good as him at the very least. That, Gwyndolin frowned, 'tis not much of a disfigurement from my understanding. Euryale gave him a dismissive wave. It is when you compare her to myself and me, we're both perfect idols be worshipped, although she's a little different from myself. She's honestly just a bit too tall. Cradling her head, Euryale gave an exaggerated sigh. It's tragic. Although I wonder if I'll ever see her again, she mused. Honestly, so far this singularity has been quite boring without my siblings. Gwyndolin gave a hum in response. Thee hath good relation with thy family then. 'Tis good, I suppose. Euryale looked him up and down, although the screen only showed his top half. What have you? Being a god yourself, I assumed you have family members or at least a pantheon to your name. Gwyndolin froze. I am the youngest of Lord Gwyn's children. He answered after a few moments. God of the dark moon. He inclined his head into a respectful bow. 'Tis an honor to be fully introduced to yourself, goddess Euryale of the ageless beauty. Ho ho ho, Euryale gave an amused giggle. That's quite the silver tongue you have there. Is this how you managed to win over myself to be your friend? 'Twas merely a case of being summoned upon the same island. Gwyndolin explained. Besides, had been many an age since I last spoke with another god. Isolationist were you? In a sense, I suppose. Gwyndolin agreed without much in the way of argument, more resigned in the fact that he had been the final god to remain in an Orlando. What of you? Lady Steno seemed quite accustomed to being upon an island. Oh, it was just me, myself, and Medusa on the shapeless isles. Euryale explained. It was just the three of us alone, not that we didn't get visitors. She waved her hand. Although they were more treasure hunters or would-be monster slayers than anything else. The goddess held a distant look in her eyes. Medusa took care of those. She blinked and then sent Gwyndolin a sly look. You've distracted me from the topic of your family. How slippery of you. Gwyndolin hummed in response. Well, she leaned forwards, resting her chin upon her hand and smiling. What of your family? I've regaled you with me and myself. I even told you about Medusa and all I know is your name. Come on now, don't be shy. Lord Gwyn was the Lord of Light. Gwyndolin explained, his voice taking on a more reverent tone. He who banished the everlasting dragons from the world and heralded the dawn of time and the age of fire. From his keep at the summit of the world, he governed everything the light touched, as was his authority over the world. Euryale remained stone-faced, slowly nodding her head. Sounds similar enough to the gods of Olympus. She nodded over to where Artemis was. You already know about her. We've met. Gwendolyn pursed his lips. She still acts the simple one, doesn't she? If you mean, love-drunk airhead, then yes, Uriah giggled, she does. HMPH. Gwendolyn crossed his arms in front of his chest. Lips curved into a mild frown. She had her moments when we last spoke not long ago, but I have since come to the conclusion that is how she is. Oh, I imagine it's just because of Orion. Uriah waved her hand. At Gwendolyn's head tilt of confusion she elaborated, most other men who even dared to look upon her would often find themselves cursed to death. She's quite selective in who gets to converse with her so casually. Perhaps then she is not so hopeless after all, Gwendolyn mused. Well, any other gods? And Orlando was the city of the gods. Gwendolyn explained, there were dozens of them along with the race of lords who inhabited the city below us. Most were the holders of lesser authorities or domains on the world. Siblings? 3. Gwendolyn replied, the oldest was a war god. The second eldest was a goddess of bounty and fertility? Probably not as pretty as me and, myself, Uriah interrupted him. Gwendolyn's lips thinned as he stared at her. What, you don't think it's true? She narrowed her eyes at him. She was regarded as the growth of the land. For as long as the sun shined in Orlando and she remained within the city, it was said the age of fire would never end. How colorful. It served its purpose in belief. Gwendolyn admitted, despite whatever else that occurred. He sighed. My second oldest sister was Philionor and she was the goddess of time. He paused. Although she assumed the matriarch role of the ringed city, so my time with her was short. Then there was my adoptive younger sister Yorshka. Only names for 2 of the 4? Uriah raised an eyebrow and shrugged. I suppose it's only natural for some other gods to have problems with their family. Not everyone can share the connection that me and myself have. Gwendolyn stared at her. In Medusa? She narrowed her eyes and gave a tight smile. That was quite clever of you there. Although I still gave you Medusa's name and she was very happy to spend time with us. Why would she not? Well, their names do not matter, so, Guinevere. Where did you? Hovel. Gwendolyn pursed his lips. I assume the bishop let it slip. Uriah raised an eyebrow. Quite the reaction. No, she smiled. I wonder what manner of face you would make behind that helm of yours. Thou art much like thy sister. Art thou? Gwendolyn gave a huff. 'Tis expected, given thy naming conventions. Obviously. Uriah replied in a mischievous tone. We are practically one and the same. Senpei. Mash tilted her head as she approached the master. The boy looked up towards her with his mouth covered by a simple fabric mask. Her eyes flickered down to the wyvern he was part way through skinning and then back to him. You're doing it yourself? Yeah. Ritska's muffled voice came from behind the mask. Figured I'd lend a hand. He looked down by his feet at Orion. How am I doing? Not bad, kid. Orion nodded his head, looking towards Mash. Aren't I a great teacher, Mashu-chan? Please praise me in the form of a tight who. Darling, Artemis' dangerously low whisper carried over the wind so that it sounded as if she had whispered into everyone's ears. Orion's jaw snapped shut and the bear looked down. I would like to retract my earlier statement. Ritska snorted and looked towards Mash. What did Drake have to say? Most of our supplies are still accounted for. Mash informed him, Asterios Sand just finished moving the ship onto the beach, so we should be able to begin repairs on the Golden Hind before nightfall. She paused and frowned. Although how long it takes to repair this ship is something else. Her eyes moved away from him and fell onto the distant horizon, and the sun which was slowly lowering in the sky. We might only have a few more hours of sunlight left before it turns to dusk. Following her line of sight, Ritska stared across towards the setting sun as well, frowning behind his makeshift mask. Still don't know where Blackbeard is though. They aren't currently within a 2-mile radius of you. Romani's voice came through the communicator. We're still working on getting specific readings of the region, but we can be certain that they aren't in your direct proximity. That's a relief then. Ritska let out a breath, turning back to the wyvern. He then paused as he saw both Havel and Sanora with a far greater pile of wyvern skin in front of the pair of them. He then looked down at his own half-done lizard and then back to the pair of them. Mash saw it and gave him a reassuring smile. Don't worry, Senpei. It's your first time doing something like this. You're also a regular human, so it's more impressive. Sanora stared at her own pile, then looked at Mash and then to Havel before her shoulders slumped. Am I not doing a good job? Mash froze like a deer in the headlights. And no. You're doing a very good job, Sanora-san. I'm sure that Captain Drake will be very happy. Ritsuka frowned. Where is she anyway? He looked around the growing campsite. I haven't seen her since I began. She's, Mash paused, frowning and looking around herself. I don't know. Do you think she wandered off? I hope not. Ritsuka frowned. Last time we went off looking for a missing crew member we got assaulted by nearly 24 wyverns. He shivered, dread to think what would happen if Drake go lost and we had to go looking for her. Fu? I'm not angry at you, Fu. Ritsuka sighed, reaching down and making to scratch behind Fu's ear. The animal ducked out of reach of his bloody fingers. The master paused and seemingly became aware of the state of his own hands before releasing an understanding grunt. Although it's a little troublesome. He lifted his hand back up and grabbed his cleaning cloth, wiping his hands down. Given the fact we ran into a rather large flock of wyverns and have already encountered a monster from Ash's world, I'd rather not be caught by surprise. Oh, Sanora broke out of her slump and looked towards the master. You encountered a monster not of this world? Which one was it? Mimic. Ah. The woman slowly nodded her head. Unfortunate. I'd only ever heard reports from some of the venturing knights about them, but none of the stories they told of them were particularly bloodless. Well, it's made me more suspicious of treasure chests, that's for sure. Ritsuka joked. Think I'll make sure someone hits them first or something. Common. Pole. Icy. Havel grunted as he pulled the hide away from the wyvern, throwing it onto the growing pile. Much. Saf. I believe you. Ritsuka nodded his head. Probably have to do that in the future then. The master continued to look around as the frown grew on his face behind the mask. Although has anyone actually seen Drake? Heaving the tree upon his shoulder, Ash turned around and stopped as the sound of a caw entered his right ear. Frowning, the saber turned his head in the direction of the bird call and looked up, soon discovering the deep black crow staring down at him with an unusual focus about it. The bird let out another caw, tilting its head and shifting its gaze until it locked eyes with him. Ash stared back at the bird, feeling a deep cold begin to take hold of him the longer he stared at the crow. Never see a crow before? Ash jolted at the tone and immediately snapped his attention to the voice before his lips thinned. David watched his reaction with a raised eyebrow. Am I really that frightening or something? Did you need something? Ash asked, shifting the trunk on his shoulder before giving the crow one final glance. The bird sent a single look towards David before letting out a louder call and then spreading its wings wide, flapping away and disappearing off into the trees. David watched the bird leave with a raised eyebrow. Is it normal to see crows all the way out here? I would not know. Ash admitted, walking past David. My experience with birds is very limited. He paused. I did encounter them, however I never stopped long to think about their behaviors. His eyebrows furrowed. Unless the Corvians count, in which case my experience with birds is actually quite terrible. David chuckled. Somehow, that does not surprise me. You seem the sort to have lived a troubled life. It was life. Ash shrugged. I will not deny I was met with difficulty, but I did not allow it to take hold of me. That's a good mentality to have. David agreed as he walked alongside the unkindled on their return to camp. Keep the mind focused on the task at hand sort of thing. Clear goal of what you want to achieve. More or less, yes. Ash nodded his head. It helped that they were simple goals to follow. Admittedly, a simple goal was more complicated in execution, but the point remains the same. No time for anything else. Distractions. Ash dismissed. The less time I spent on my chosen path, the more likely I was to lose my way. I will admit that some tasks I performed did not adhere to my overarching duty, but they still worked to benefit me in a practical way in some capacity. Therefore it was acceptable. David hummed as he nodded his head. Heard you were a warrior of sunlight, was it? I am. Ash nodded his head. We are a covenant whose mission is to aid our summoners upon our arrival, whatever the job may be. Not too different from what you're doing now then. There was a very small learning curve. Ash agreed, but it is more in line with what I am used to. Fate of the world. Yes. Oh. David blinked, then gave a shrug and a smile. Seems as though you've at least got experience in that regard. He paused and sent Ash an inquisitive glance. So how did the Sunlight Covenant benefit you in a practical way? I can't imagine being summoned away to help others was something that was a short endeavor. It wasn't. I'm not insulting you. David reassured. It's actually quite noble, isn't it? Going out of your way to help other people. I approve. It's a very admirable deed to help others even if you don't know them. Ash stopped walking, his lip quivered slightly. That is, he continued on, I do not know if it is admirable or not. My summoning involved slaying the heir to fire within the location so that my summoner could pass. The point still stands though. David went on. Who knows where those people would be without you? They'd have passed through eventually. Ash dismissed. Given enough tries, they'd have figured out a solution. I just sped their journey along. There is such a thing as being too humble, you know? David pointed out with a wry smile. I know being too prideful is a sin, but that doesn't mean you can't at least show some pride in your own hard work. Maybe you were simply fulfilling God's plan in your own limited capacity, but you can at least take joy in the way you played your part. Joy, is it? Ash muttered under his breath. I remember telling the firekeeper about the first time I was summoned to help. His lips thinned. She smiled as said it was very noble of me to aid other unkindled like myself. He shrugged as best he could. If she believes it to be a noble deed, who am I to disagree? David stared at him, a curious thought coming to his mind. Why did you keep helping them? Ash stared at him with a peculiar expression. It provided me with a purpose to fulfill. My efforts were meaningful in some way and because the firekeeper said it was noble. He replied as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Hearing of my endeavors made her smile so. So, he looked away, stealing his expression. I just thought it would be nice if she smiled more. That's a selfish reason to do something like that. David pointed out, going out of your way to help others just so your own Abishag can smile. He paused and allowed himself a genuine smile. But I won't say that's a bad thing. It's all right to do great deeds if at the end of the day, it's something you want to do to warm the heart of a maiden. He threw his arms wide. After all, it's why I want to build a temple to God. Ash stared at him. Admittedly, I am a servant of God as well. David went on. Therefore, it is only right I build one for him. However, if it just so happens to make me closer to meeting with Abishag, then that is all right as well. He unashamedly added on. That is just how it is. He paused and tilted his head. Still, is that how you determined something was good? Because this girl smiled at you? Ash blinked at him. Cecilia always smiled when she was gladdened by something and frowned when something saddened her. He shrugged. She had been alive longer than I, so I trusted her to be more informed as to what was right and wrong. David blinked at him, then made an O shape with his mouth. I see. He gave a sage nod of his head. Children always adhere to their parents' morals. She wasn't my mother. Ash frowned. I do not understand how that point keeps being inferred. He gave an annoyed shake of his head. She did not birth me, so how could she be my mother? The title of mother is not so constrictive that a woman cannot claim a child as her own despite not giving birth to them. David replied with a soft tone, and there is nothing to state that a child without a mother can never find one. Whatever else you may claim, this Cecilia clearly played an important role in your life. Is it wrong to describe it as parental? I have no memory of my parents. Ash shrugged. Nor do I have any memory of my life before being risen. I cannot tell you how a parent is supposed to act. I am, admittedly, not the best person to comment upon that either. David replied with a chuckle, shaking his head, but I'm sure you could always ask around if you feel that strongly about it. Giving the unkindled a curious look, he placed his hands on his hips and hummed. Has she been summoned yet? I realized that this Chaldea obviously has quite the gathering of heroic spirits to it so far. Not yet. Ash shook his head. It is unusual to return to a place with the knowledge she is not there. I did encounter her in a previous singularity however. It is how she was able to acquire the name Cecilia. Cecilia. David nodded, tasting the name. I like it. Very beautiful. Ash gave him a pointed look. The man raised his hands. Don't look at me like that. I'm just saying it's a nice name is all. I wouldn't dream of making moves upon your mother. The man seemed to debate something in his head before continuing on. At least not until I actually met her. Ash's look seemed to intensify. Is there a reason you are here and not helping the others? He eventually asked the man with a slightly suspicious tone. David gave a hearty chuckle in response. I'm a shepherd, not a butcher. David explained away. I'm afraid I'd be quite useless with the whole gutting wyverns process. I'd never even laid eyes upon a wyvern until recently, so I'd be even more useless. A silence descended. Also, it's gross. And you haven't aided with the carrying of supplies and materials because I don't want to ruin my harp-playing fingers. What's a harp, dear me? David shook his head. Never heard the beauty of sound, have you? Not to worry, my good man. I shall endeavor to indulge you. He smiled. I am quite the talented player of it, if I do say so myself. Ash gave a disinterested hum in response as he approached the camp, David walking alongside him as the unkindled dropped the tree with the growing pile and turned away. Not getting far before Drake's voice carried out across the beach. Break time. Ash stared in her direction before making to continue on. Not going to take a break? I do not need one. Ash replied with a blank expression. The living crew might be in need of rest. I am not among their number. Myself and the other servants can continue on while they recover. David stared towards the camp with a raised eyebrow. Are you sure? Because they seem to be joining the crew. They're what? Ash looked over his shoulder and, sure enough, the other servants were already gathering around a makeshift campfire. He frowned. Is it wise for us to dawdle? It is entirely up to you. David pat him on the back, but I'd recommend joining them for at least a bit, unless you mean to tell me you've never taken a rest in your life. Ash frowned, looking down before his shoulders slumped in resignation. It would be wrong to say that he had never taken a rest before. Some of his few moments of peace just came from sitting near the bonfire in Firelink Shrine and speaking with Cecilia. If they felt more comfortable with his presence around him during their own rest period, then that was fine. It would make the rest useful to some degree at least. Very well. Ash gave a small nod to David, turning to face the direction of the camp and walking towards it. I will join them. See? Nothing wrong with a little break. David chuckled as he walked alongside the unkindled. It does wonders for the soul, and if God truly intended for us to work every single hour of every day, he'd have never made it so he can get tired. It was telling, Ash thought, that he had never felt tired in his life then. Ash-san. Mash waved him over as soon as she caught sight of him, gesturing to the log she and Ritska were sat on. We didn't know if you would join us. Happy you did though. Ritska gave him a half smile. Feels like we haven't had a proper break in ages. Likely because we haven't, Ash replied as he moved to sit down near the fire. Not since we departed Chaldea at least. More surprised you turned up. Drake commented from her own spot opposite him. Ash's eyes fell upon her with an emotionless feel to them. No, rest is for the weak, spiel for us. She tilted her head. Or, the more time you spend sleeping, the less time you spend doing your duty. Something along those lines. I have taken periods of rest before. Ash dryly commented, usually to think over previous engagements or simply, he cut himself off, never mind. Although if you would wish me to argue that as servants myself and the others can continue on unhindered. Drake waved her hand dismissively, my crew, still got to do what I say. Then I am here. Ash gestured to the crackling fire in front of him, resting as you command. For as long as you command. He nodded to Ritska, or until he tells me to stop. Drake gave him a slow blink. All right then. She scratched her cheek. Strategize you say? Not a bad idea. Haven't had a chance to talk about Blackbeard's group. She pointed out, looking to the servants. So, anyone got any ideas? Their saber was well trained. Archer pointed out as he brought over the stew that he'd been making since earlier. Not one I would recommend engaging in a fair fight. He frowned, strong too, considering he was able to briefly contend with the berserker over there. He nodded towards Asterios. The Minotaur let out a low growl. So just gang up on him or something. Seems dishonorable. Sanora grumbled to herself, crossing her arms across her chest. A knight should not have to worry about being backstabbed in a duel, or challenging a trespasser only for them to pull out a staff and begin unleashing spells. Hobble grunted at the latter part of the argument. Sork, sir, scum. Fortunate then, that very few of us here are knights. His eyes fell upon Oscar. The man sat with his hands resting atop his knees and staring at the fire. Do you have issue with it? HHMPH. Oscar jolted out of a trance, looking up to Archer. Pardon? Sorry, I was absorbed in thought. Archer raised an eyebrow at him. The guy in armor. Drake clarified, we're gonna jump him with numbers. Oscar remained silent. Do as you will, he replied in a quiet tone. If you believe that to be the best course of action, then I will not voice opposition. Still don't like it, Sanora huffed. Fine. If that is how you all wish to act. Could always just loose an arrow into his head from a distance. Orion offered, looking up at Artemis. You can do that, right? Of course, darling, Artemis beamed. I can easily do that if you want. Ritska scratched his chin. What about the assassin? He seemed quite good as well. He nodded to Mash. He was able to cut Mash too. It was not as deep as I feared, Senpei. Mash replied, but perhaps it was something related to the servant. Boudica hummed in thought, perhaps a servant who is particularly skilled at killing women. Mash frowned, it's possible. What do you think, doctor? It's not unheard of to have servants with specific traits geared towards a specific target. Romani replied in a clinical tone. Even Ash is an example of this with one of his skills, designed to kill beings of mystical nature. Although having a skill geared specifically towards killing women. He hummed. I'd recommend caution if that is the case, perhaps try and defeat him with the male servants. Ritska nodded his head. We never got any of their names, did we? Archer was silent for a few moments before he replied. I believe Blackbeard let slip the saber's name. Rendell? Oscar looked at Archer. Rendell? You're sure? Archer stared at him. You recognize the name? A tale, long ago. One of the neighboring kingdoms of Astora was the land of Baldur. When the curse of the undead first began to appear, Baldur suffered worst of all with many of its people falling victim to it. The knight frowned. It was around 100 years before I myself made the attempt, but the Night King Rendell was said to have led his people to Lordran for reasons unknown and were never heard from again. A king, Drake scratched her chin, king of knights as well. No wonder he's apparently good with a sword. She frowned. Then there's that, Sammy. Strange name for an angel. Ritska mused, then widened his eyes. We're not dealing with an actual angel, right? No, Romani denied. For starters, angels exist on a completely different texture to humans and cannot interact in the world in any great capacity. Also, the divinity the servant displayed was strange, something akin to a low-level divine spirit. Did you have angels in your own world? Olga asked, moving out from behind Romani with a slightly nervous tinge to her voice. I encountered angels before, yes. Ash nodded his head. It was also said that Gertrude was a daughter of the heavens and communed directly with a visiting angel, but as for speaking with them, I wouldn't know. Rarely, met, Havel grunted out, turning the group's attention to him as he crossed his arms in front of his chest. Servants of light didn't speak much. So, it is an actual angel? Drake blinked at him. Have shrugged, looked. The part, I think, a little blurry. Blurry? Drake stared at him with a raised eyebrow. I could see them just fine? You could? David stared at her in surprise. They looked a little transparent to me, as if they weren't all there. That doesn't make sense. Unless, Romani cupped his chin. Both you and Havel have the divinity skill within your container. That might be it. He offered with a shrug. Maybe it's easier for purely humans to perceive them. That is odd. David blinked before shrugging, or maybe not. I am no angel, so I can't comment on it. What about Sammy's physical skills? Are we actually calling them that? Ritska asked with a raised eyebrow, because that feels weird. Do you want to think of them as an actual angel? You make a good point. Ritska replied back, so, skills? Casts magic, but my resistance was able to counter that. David remarked, as far as strength goes. Probably a little stronger than me, but not by much. Definitely didn't rely on close range though. They always seemed to rely on using magic first and foremost. Unless you're me. Drake rolled her shoulder. Been a while since I got handled that roughly. The real problem is Blackbeard. Romani pointed out, considering he's the holder of the Holy Grail, but there was something interesting I noted. He looked off to the side, pointing towards one of the monitors and attracting the director's attention to it. The woman frowned as she read the readings. The moment Berserker was killed, the strength of his signature decreased. She read aloud. Is it a noble phantasm based on the servant complement? It's entirely possible. Romani agreed. It would also make sense why he would want an actual goddess upon his ship aside from, well, his features scrunched up, other reasons. He already has a being of high divinity on board. Olga nodded to herself. That would explain how he was able to reuse his noble phantasm so quickly, holder of the Grail or not. We already knew that we'd need to take out his crew. Ritska pointed out. Although this does explain most of it, so we should take out the angel first? That is what I would recommend. Romani nodded his head. The angel and Rendell are clearly Blackbeard's top servants he has on board, which makes them the heavy hitters. He looked away. Ash, you were attacked by his other two servants. What can you tell us? The women were well coordinated with their roles. Simple. Ash replied. The taller one used a ranged weapon to distract me and provide openings for the smaller one to exploit. I can deal with one of them easily enough. Working together they pose a greater challenge. So splitting them up would be a good idea, Ritska surmised, and the other archer. Half-light. Ash nodded his head. I can handle him easily enough. The issue is his bow. The weapon is enchanted to make the arrows invisible until after they strike you. As for his sword, he trailed off. It's short-range but powerful. Provided I can get close and stop him from swinging it or can avoid the swing itself, it poses no danger. He frowned. However, his generation of light spears is what grants him an edge. They will either float above his shoulders or erupt from the ground. He explained, should you see crackling light, I'd recommend dodging. He'll probably go for you though. Drake pointed out, so I assume you can take care of him. I can. Ash nodded his head. I was the one who killed him in life. Another one? Olga could be heard grumbling to herself. Why are we always encountering servants that have been killed by him? And he seems to hold a particular vendetta against me, he went on. Something about a city, I believe. David hummed while scratching his chin, a lot of colorful accusations. The ringed city. Ash nodded his head, and he is not incorrect. The city only survived as long as Filianor was asleep. The moment I woke her, the spell which protected it from the ravages of time came undone. He shrugged. Although I did not personally kill every single denizen of the city. So why did you wake her? Ritska asked, leaning forward slightly. I was tasked with getting the dark soul from the pygmy lords along with Gale. Ash explained, I was informed that the Church of Filianor was the most direct route towards obtaining it. Silence descended upon the camp before Euryale asked the very simple question. Were you aware what would happen if you woke the goddess? They made no effort to hide the fact ruin would befall the city. Ash replied unashamedly. However, what befell the city was not my concern. By its end, I succeeded in obtaining the dark soul and the ringed city is no more. And Filianor? Euryale inquired further. She knew they were Gwendolyn's older sister and were now more than a little curious about it. Dead. The reply was quick and without much in the way of emotion. When time caught up with the city she was little more than a skeleton. The silence seemed to grow heavier. The only sound to be heard were Havel's repeated tappings on his arm as he continued to stare into the fire. Ash-san, Mash stared at him. You wiped out a city, Boudica finished, staring at him with a disturbed look. Was there no other method? Ash blinked. If there was, I did not search for it. I was simply told that to awaken the slumbering princess was to be granted access to the dark soul. He shrugged. It did, so I have no reason to complain. And all those people? Sanora growled. What of them? What of them? Ash tilted his head, furrowing his brows at her. From my understanding they simply died of old age. Filianor's waking meant the city was no longer in a separate time from my own. It suffered the exact same fate as all other cities in the world. Through your actions. The knight pressured. Have you the least bit of shame? Why would I be ashamed? Ash looked at her in confusion. I performed the task set before me and completed it. I would only feel shame if it had been for nothing. What was the ringed city like? Ritska asked in a quiet tone, staring at the campfire. Pointless. Ash replied easily. It had remained unchanged since the beginning of the Age of Fire. It had made no progress and simply existed for the sake of existence. There was no contribution to be made except for that which I brought about. He shrugged. It served to gift me the dark soul which I, in turn, gifted to the painter so that she might create a new world. Regardless of how many bodies you had to step over, Archer inferred with a raised eyebrow, all for the sake of a better world? I believe so. Ash nodded his head. My purpose in being risen was to aid the world to the best of my capacity. Regardless of what form that may take or what I must do. It is all for the sake of fulfilling my duty. Spoken like a loyal dog. Archer scoffed, rising from his seating position and giving Ritska a faint smirk. You should be grateful, master. You found yourself a servant who won't mind getting their hands dirty in the least so long as you give them a good enough reason. Giving Ash one last glance, he shook his head and walked off. Oscar quietly rose up from his log, giving a shaky breath. Perhaps that conviction is what I lacked. But I do not know if that is for the best or not. He turned away, walking towards the beach. Havel was the next to depart. The tapping ceased with the berserker grunting as he stood up, giving Ash a long look before he turned around and stomped away. David watched him go before quietly following after him. Ash saw the faces around him and frowned, turning to Ritska and giving him an expression of purely innocent confusion. Have I said something wrong? Ritska stared at Ash with a blank expression. I don't know, Ash, he replied, reaching up and rubbing his brows. But I'd say so. I'd say that sounded very, very wrong. The people did not suffer if that concerns you. No, Ash, Ritska shook his head. That isn't it, he sighed, pushing himself to his feet. He turned to Mash. I'm going for a walk. I'll come with you, senpai. Mash rose to her feet, giving Ash a slightly pitiable look and then following after him. The pair walked along the shoreline and gradually shrank as they ventured further into the distance. Ash turned back to the campfire and stared into it. Drake still looking at him with a blank expression on her face. All dead then, Yes. Drake nodded her head. Feel guilty? Why would I? The woman shrugged. I don't know, she casually replied. Normally people might feel guilty over that sort of stuff. Drake raised an eyebrow at him. You ever done anything that didn't involve killing? No, I see. She sighed. Must have been an average day for you then, huh? It was not unusual. No, Ash replied. Why? Just figuring something out is all. She dismissed. Don't mind me. Sanora was still staring, or rather glaring, at Ash, an unrepentant murderer. Ash frowned at her. You were a guardian of a cathedral, no? I was, so did you repent for every life you took while performing your duty? Sanora's shoulders trembled. You think you can compare your defilement to my? Ash gestured to himself. My duty lay in retrieving the dark soul through any means available to me. He pointed towards her. Yours lay in protecting your cathedral from all manner of intruders. We did not question it, I assume. He looked down. Besides, it brought about a new world free of the flame and the corruption of the abyss. He shrugged. If you were to call it a trade, I would consider it more than fair. You wouldn't call it a trade then? Orion questioned. A city for a world? The thought of a trade did not even enter my head at the time. Ash admitted. Regardless, it is done now. Besides, the egg Philionor protected was already coming undone. All I did was hasten the shattering. A silence descended upon the remains of the camp in the wake of the reveal. Ash pursed his lips as he stared at the fire. The reactions were certainly more unexpected than he had anticipated. It was sufficient reason in his eyes why the ringed city should be traded for the dark soul. His eyes flickered away. If that was their reaction to learning how he justified claiming the dark soul, he wondered how they would view his letting the flame fade. He dismissed the thought in his mind. Not that it mattered, what was done was done. He did what he believed to be correct. The coming of the Age of Dark was inevitable. It was why he had allowed the flame to fade. Sacrificing himself for a ritual which was ultimately meaningless made no sense to him. There was nothing to be gained in the least. It was better for everyone to let the flame fade. It was a meaningless duty to sacrifice yourself for it, so he ensured no one would have to do it again. What would be wrong with that? He did it for humanity anyway. And Ash isn't quite stable sort, and that's been revealed. Ringed City reveal and reactions. Ritska going for a less than enthusiastic walk in the woods. Fun times all around. Now then, it was obviously the dark lurker, so you'll want some stats for them, won't you? You greedy guts. No dialogue though, because they don't speak, but you can infer relationships they have. Dark lurker, Sammy, servant. Caster strength, C. Endurance. B agility. D mana. B luck. B noble phantasm, C. Legacy of old kings. C. Init unit self, max target. 1, max range, 0. Splits into 2 beings. Stats remain unchanged, class skills. Territory creation. D. Item construction. Magic resistance. C. Does not extend to lightning-based attacks, degraded to rank D. Fragment of Old Lord's Soul. E. Similar effect to Divine Core of equal rank. Personal skills. Dark sorcery. B. Pyromancy. B. Limited to a simple attacks, however they are potent. Inhuman disposition. A. Plus mental attacks pose it no danger. Emissary of light. B. Because their role is to prevent the spread of the abyss, it is only visible to those with human blood. However, the greater the dilution of humanity, the more difficult they are to perceive. The Darklurker gains bonus advantages against those that are purely human. Instant teleportation. C. Can move through short-range gates. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 67. True Colors. Ritska wasn't quite sure how long he walked before eventually coming to a stop near enough the shore of the beach that the waves only just touched upon his shoes. The master released a gentle exhale as he placed his hands upon his hips and stared out across the horizon. His features were set in a perfect mask. He stared out as the sun touched upon the edge of the darkening sky, slowly descending and forming a rather beautiful sunset which, combined with the scenery, gave off a feeling of tranquility. Ritska wasn't sure if he could enjoy it or not. "Senpai?" Mash's timid voice reached his ears. He gave a hum of acknowledgement. "Are you all right?" she queried, approaching closer with a faint look of concern on her face. "Did what Ash-san say bother you?" "A little bit," he admitted. He frowned. "It's just that." "Are you concerned about his story of the city?" "I'm not ignorant." Ritska sighed, lifting up his left hand and running it through his hair. "I know what some of the people we have in Chaldea are like. Boudica's campaign against the Romans is pretty much brutal slaughter, and even Jean was a leading member during the 100 Years' War, so you can't tell me she didn't kill anyone, but," he frowned, "I always got the feeling that they felt something for their actions." He stressed, "Jean might be regretful for killing or proud for defending her homeland from invasion." Waving his hand back the way he came, he shook his head. "Even Boudica would likely feel something. You saw how she reacted when Nero came up, didn't you?" Mash nodded her head. "But Ash," Ritska gave an unsure shrug, "he just didn't seem like he cared at all. He makes it sound as though he just waltzes into a city and wipes it out as easily as I take out a trash bag." He bit his lip, shaking his head. "It isn't right." Releasing a mirthless huff, he threw his arms up. "He even says he saved his world. He did, himself. But he doesn't even smile when he says that. It's like he doesn't care about anything and that." Mash looked down, slowly nodding her head. "It seems very cold, senpai." He racked his brain as he continued on. "I even remember in Rome when he warned us about Sullivan, about how he killed an entire city, but he just admitted to doing the exact same thing. I don't know, it feels as though he's maybe leaving something out or isn't explaining well or something." He exhaled heavily. "I'd like to think so anyway." Mash hummed in acknowledgement. "You think Ash-san might not have told the whole story, senpai?" "I don't know. Maybe." Ritska struggled. "I feel like he didn't give much of an explanation, but even with how he acted back there." He shrugged. "I don't know. It's just that compared to Sigward he just seems." He frowned. "I feel like I could do with having Cecilia here." Mash blinked. "Cecilia-san? Why?" "She knows Ash best." Ritska explained, "Probably better than the two of us combined. She said he exaggerated a lot of what he felt, but I didn't think it went this far. I was imagining how instead of giving a small smile you burst into a laugh, kind of deal." Not releasing a heavy breath, he reached up and rubbed his eyes. "Just wanted to get that off my chest. Hope I didn't come off as too rude to him." He frowned. "I think he will forgive you, senpai." Mash assured him with a confident smile. It was something troubling that he revealed, but, she frowned. "I was aware that heroic spirits did not live bloodless lives, but it felt as though he did not care about it." She tilted her head. "I cannot decide if that is good or bad that he doesn't feel ashamed of his past. An eternal question one must ask, is it not?" The warped voice spoke from behind them. Ritska instantly reacted by spinning around. Mash rushed in front of him, shield brought forth and held up in a defensive manner. Whether one's actions should bring shame, or perhaps a sense of completion. "Stay behind me, senpai," Mash exclaimed as she stared down at the area in front of them. The sand meters from them burned into glass and split apart. Blackened roots sprung forth from the ground and began to wrap themselves into a shape. Doctor? Servant approached. Doctor? She looked to the communicator. Director? In such a rush to bring an audience, are you? The burning roots chuckled in a pleasant tone, their shape tightening until it formed the image of a misshapen head. A glowing eye locked onto the pair as the still burning bush stared down at them, focusing itself entirely upon the shielder. How interesting, the voice mused with a hint of intrigue. One with no spirit to be found and one with spirit yet to be discovered. Ritska stared up at the figure and tightened his expression, the caster from Rome. The glowing eye shifted from Mash towards Ritska and intensified. A deeply pleased noise bubbled forth from the bush. Ah yes. I believe we've been acquainted. Young human, how goes your path of a true monarch? Ritska frowned. I told you, I'm not doing this to be a monarch or king or whatever. A gentle chuckle emerged from the bush. Oh, young human. There are few ways to describe one who overcomes fate. Who is to say a kingdom is material? Mash shuffled closer to Ritska. You are the servant that Senpei encountered in Rome. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. Are you an ally? Such simple terms. Castor rumbled. Ally or enemy? I am but a scholar. I bestow knowledge upon all who seek it, or desire it. Ritska stared at the glowing eye. Is that why you're here? To tell us something. You must present a question for it to be answered. Castor replied with a warm tone, but I shall answer only one. To rob you of your own deductions would be most saddening. Releasing a mirthless snort, Ritska crossed his arms in front of his chest and stared at the caster with a pensive expression. Can never be easy, can it? He narrowed his eyes. Are you a servant from this world or ashes? The painting, or the ruin? Castor asked with an amused tone, prompting a blink from Ritska. He explained the paintings to you. The caster stated with utmost accuracy. A world beyond the scope of light in reach of dark. A gentle place and one I very much approve of. The glowing eye narrowed. That does not interest you though, does it? Ritska slowly shook his head. No, your question is simpler. You know about the ringed city or whatever. I do. Is that your question? Ritska made to reply and then slowly closed his mouth, shaking his head. No, I'll hear the full story from Ash. The first step of a scholar indeed. Castor gave a pleased rumble. Perhaps you have missed your calling. A sigh left the caster's mouth. But very well. The roots around the base slowly began to retract across the sand and sink back beneath it before pausing. What of you? Ephemeral but innocent one. Castor's eye landed upon Mash. The girl blinked at being addressed. Have you a question? Do you have a true name? Mash inquired, just in case anyone in Chaldea knows about you. Should we meet a third time, I will introduce myself more formally. The caster agreed as their final remnants slipped into the ground, disappearing entirely from view. May we meet again. Ritska and Mash stared at the spot where the caster had emerged. The sand was covered in a thick layer of blackened ash, with the central area where the servant had emerged being covered in a thin layer of glass from the extreme heat. Releasing a sigh, the master rubbed their forehead. Should probably get back to the others. And let the director know we encountered the mystery caster servant again. He turned to Mash. Could you tell anything about them? Mash shook her head. No, Senpei. I couldn't even tell they were here until they revealed themselves. Her expression became troubled. If it were not for the fact they were right in front of me, I would not have been able to tell they were even present at all. She took on a thoughtful look. It might be a form of concealment magecraft? But cutting off communications with Chaldea as well? Ritska queried, then shook his head. That doesn't sound right either. He also gives off the feeling that he knows more than he's letting on. Does he? Mash blinked, then pursed her lips. Do you think he knows about the singularities? Ritska blinked and then palmed his face. Should have asked him about that, shouldn't I? Maybe, Senpei. Mash admitted with a strained smile before her own expression turned downcast. But it slipped my mind as well when he asked me. I just couldn't think of a good question for them beyond asking their true name in case we could research them. We know they're from Ash's world at least. Ritska pointed out, given they knew about the painting worlds. Mash slowly nodded her head. Their appearance is also quite distinctive, but no one in Chaldea when he last appeared knew who they were. No, they didn't. Ritska frowned, cupping his chin. He remained silent for a few moments before shaking his head. We can think about it later, we should head back before they begin to miss us. He turned so stare at the sunset. Also I'm getting a little tired. He probably didn't mean to rush off in such a hurry. Boudica assured him as the pair cleaned away the embers of the campsite. Ash blinked and tilted his head in confusion at her. Ritska. He probably just needs to think things over. She sighed. I suppose he's never really been confronted outright with the legends of his servants. Ash stared at her. I do not mind if he needs time to think. He replied, I have shared my story of the ringed city, there is little more I can do. You have. Boudica agreed, looking Ash up and down with an impassive expression. Do you truly feel nothing in regards to what you did? I felt. Ash tapered off, looking away. Gale lost his life retrieving the dark soul. I felt saddened that he was unable to fulfill his pledge to the painter. It was what he had strived towards for longer than I could imagine. As for when I gifted the painter the dark soul to use as pigment, I felt satisfaction in completing what I had set out to do. Boudica gave a hum as she nodded her head. Most heroes are overflowing with pride if they achieved something like that. She remarked, likely along the lines of, I conquered this ancient city outside of time and returned with a great prize. She crossed over her chest and nodded her head. That's mainly what caught me off guard. Because I lack pride. Ash tilted his head. I do not see a reason to be prideful in it. I did what was asked of me. And as you are now, I am fulfilling my duty to render aid to Ritska and Mash. He nodded his head. I have satisfaction in my goal. I heard you saved the director too. Boudica pointed out, no one asked you to do that. They didn't, Ash affirmed, but it was more of a circumstantial rescue. There was no intention behind it. Do you regret saving her? No, Ash replied quickly. It was unexpected to be able to save a life rather than take one. He slowly answered, it is not an experience I would like to forget. Boudica hummed in response with a knowing smile on her face. I see. Well, that aside, she continued on, I'm in no position to judge you, considering my own legend. Ash gave her a blank look in response, prompting a sigh from her. The woman waved her hand in front of her face. Ah, right. Of course, you wouldn't know, would you? He shook his head. Well, suffice to say my history is very bloody. Boudica replied, it could very easily be described as the Romans hurt me and my people so I hurt them back. She looked away, much more than was necessary, looking back at it. But whenever I saw a Roman, all I could see were the faces of those who brutalized my family and, she sighed. We were not a kind people to our enemies. Ash tilted his head. Did you enjoy it? Oh yes. She admitted, very much so. I finally achieved my vengeance against the Romans. I could inflict upon them the very same cruelty they inflicted upon me. She paused. Then we lost. Looking down at her hands, she rubbed them together. Lead all of my people in rebellion against our Roman oppressors. And I lead them all to their deaths as well. Ash stared at her. Your enjoyment of brutality is not something I can approve of. But, he paused when she looked like she wanted to reply. But considering you are expressing shame in your past, I cannot comment on it. You understand your actions were wrong. He paused for a few moments. Was your intention freedom from Roman occupation? It was. Boudica nodded her head. Wanted to get back at the Romans for all they did to me, but I wanted my people to be free of them. Giving a half shrug, her expression flattened. Maybe I lost sight of why I was doing it partway through. You did not succeed then. Ash stated, his expression troubled. That is unfortunate. More unfortunate that my people all ended up butchered. Boudica scoffed, reaching up and rubbing her brows with one hand. It's in the past now, but I'll never forgive them for what they did. I am not one to absolve sins. Ash shook his head, and I was not present at the time so I cannot state whether or not the deaths of all those you killed were necessary. They weren't. Boudica replied with a thin expression, they really weren't. Then I cannot approve of it. Ash replied easily. You fought for duty to your people and lost to indulgence in brutality. Boudica raised an eyebrow at him before a thought occurred to her. If I said I felt nothing when I killed all those Romans and that it was entirely necessary, would you have a problem with me? Ash stared at her with his brows furrowed. Why would I? It was an act of necessity rather than indulgence and worked to a goal you believed in. If those people had to die, then they had to die. Regardless of who they were. Yes. Ash nodded his head. But if what you have told me is true, they did not have to die, so I cannot approve of the acts themselves. Your duty to free your people from occupation is one I have no complaints with, but the fact you enjoyed the deaths of those you killed is not something I can accept." Boudica stared at him for a few moments before she released a huff, shaking her head and staring at Ash with a disbelieving expression. "That's a very simple way of looking at it, isn't it?" Her expression shifted into a softer one. "People are more complicated than that. Sometimes they do things because they feel like it." She shrugged. "People have committed greater acts of kindness than me simply because they felt like doing it on a whim." Ash remained silent as he stared at Boudica, his eyes shifted away from her and towards the ground. "That is not something I can understand. Duty is supposed to give you meaning." He looked towards her with an innocent expression. "So how can an act have meaning if it is not born of duty?" "I can't answer that for you," Boudica replied with a shrug, "because it's all based upon feelings. I can't explain my feelings to you because they're mine. But if that is how you want to live your life, then I hope you change your mind, because it's really quite sad to see. You were alive to begin with." Ash replied easily. "I was not. Perhaps that is the difference. Neither of us are really alive right now," Boudica wryly pointed out, "so I can't really see that as a reason anymore." Ash grunted in response, looking around to see the others moving about the camp. "Have I caused distress?" "Oh, them?" She looked around, her expression flattening. "Don't worry about them. I'll be sure to give Archer a stern talking to about making remarks like that. It wasn't a very nice thing for him to say." "I do not. I do." Boudica cut him off. "Just because I can't understand your way of living doesn't mean that I should make fun of you for it. Having your very way of life mocked to your face is what first got me to hate the Romans. I'm not going through that again." "Do as you will then," Ash permissively replied, "if you believe it will matter." "Don't worry." She patted him on the shoulder as she walked past. "I think I understand you a little better. You aren't all that complicated actually. It is a simple way of existing," Ash remarked. "It is how you stay sane." Oscar stared out in silence towards the setting sun, eyes fixed upon it behind his helmet. His mind was already awash with doubt as to whether or not he was truly fitting to be stood here while someone of actual worth had died so that he could escape. It has since spiraled on from there. Heroes of ancient and future legends as well as those of other worlds were always but a few feet from him. He stared down at his hands. What was he to even dream of standing next to them? Raiding the cities of the gods, serving the gods and the like. His greatest pride was that he was a knight of Astora, who had stumbled at the first hurdle like a fool and hollowed soon after. However, when he thought about the cost of being remembered, the destruction of a whole city, was that really what it took to be worth remembering? His eyes fell onto the box he kept at his waist. There was information at the tips of his fingers, just a sliver, but it felt wrong or perhaps incomplete. Undead like himself would not wander into cities to butcher the inhabitants even if it were for the sake of duty. That much he had to believe in. He moved his hand closer to the box and flipped the latch open, resting his palm just above the black void. He steadied his breathing as he closed his eyes. He would have to be quick so as to not alarm anyone. He moved his hand towards the box and grasped onto that which he searched for. What he discovered would determine much of who Ash was. But perhaps information on the others he had met would not be wrong to learn of. He closed his eyes and concentrated as the information filed its way into his head regarding the ringed city, and what had occurred there. His shoulders trembled for a few moments before he wrenched his hand away from the box and released a heavy sigh of relief. Another city of hollows, he exhaled, moving his left hand to cradle his helmet. No great loss then, he regained his composure as he best he saw. An everlasting archdragon. He breathed out in shock as more information filed its way into his head. A city which resided upon the end of the world. Legions who were felled trying to gain entry. Guardians pulled from across time. Giants and servants of the gods. The abyss which had felled Ulasil. Oscar's mind wrangled with the sudden influx of information, his shoulders trembling as his breathing began to quicken. He couldn't help it at this point. Havel, who slew everlasting dragons only to side with a rogue goddess to slay Seath. Sir Sanora, who guarded the Cathedral of Haida in service to a god of flame and goddess of bounty. Euryale, a goddess who was lusted after by many. Asterios, a beast who slew many and was slain. Boudica, who led a rebellion and met her ruin. David, ancient king who felled a giant. Orion and Artemis, a hunter and the goddess who fell in love with him. Sir Francis Drake, who navigated the world and routed the armada of an empire. He wrenched his hand away from the box, the lid snapping shut as he began to pant heavily. His knees shook before giving out and allowing him to drop into the sand, eyes fixed firmly upon the setting sun in the distance. Ha! Ha ha! A quiet laugh slowly bubbled in the back of his throat. Ha ha ha! Ha ha ha! Which slowly began to grow in intensity until it became maniac. Ha 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 ha! He fell forwards and propped himself up with his hands. His gloves splayed into the sand as he continued his crazed laughter. A fisherman, he wheezed out. I stumbled at the first hurdle and can be called a heroic spirit. The laugh broke into a pained sob. What did I do to deserve this? What deeds did I? He would have cried to himself if he had tears to shed. The sob devolved into a sniffle. Why did you summon me? Why couldn't you have left me be? He questioned, slamming his fist into the sand. What good am I? Is that what granted me my place on your throne? He cried out. One good word from a better man and you think that gives me the right to stand alongside them? He received no answer. Well, he stared at the sky. His tone shifted into a broken pleading. Well? Please, tell me. Oscar begged with his whole being. Please. Am I really that deserving of it? A failure who could only burden others with his mission? Is that what I am summoned to be? He remained silent at the whistling of the breeze in his ears and the quiet tide. So that is what I am. Oscar muttered to himself as he rose to his feet. Very well, if it all I am good for. I shall defend it with me being, for all it is worth. The pair stood in perfect silence upon the beach. So you seem troubled. Didn't care for Ring City. Havel grunted in response, his voice sounding tired beyond all measure. Thought it was waste. His arms were crossed in front of him with his hands tightened into fists. Wanted to smash dragon egg. He snarled. David didn't allow himself to be intimidated by the voice as he slowly nodded his head. It wasn't the city you cared for, was it? David stated, his own expression set in a sad smile. No, you didn't react that much until after Ash revealed the fate of Filianor. Havel silently nodded his head. Was there when she was born, he quietly revealed to the archer. Was there when they were all born. I see. David slowly nodded his head. I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sure she's in a better place now. Should never have been there. Havel's shoulders trembled. Was always stup. Id. The berserker growled. See. Ling. Awa. Why, so, of. Human. Ity. A dismissive huff poured out from the helmet. Ha. D. Ulrea. Die. Been. Gifted. To. Humans. Made. No. Difference. What was she like? David asked, tilting his head in questioning. Havel slowly turned to stare down at the archer for a few moments before he released a dry snort. Doesn't matter. Now. I like to think it does. David moved closer to him, especially if she was important to you as someone close. Perhaps the child of a close friend? He queried. The way Havel's shoulders tightened and he looked away informed him he had struck true. It is best to recall how we remember our departed, so that we might never truly forget them. So, tell me about Filianor. Al. Ways. SMI. Ling. Havel's shoulders loosened as his tone took on a much softer note to it. Would. Ma. K. Flow. Where's bloom. Out. Of. See. Sun. David chuckled. Sounds like quite the gifted one. She. Was. He reminisced. Farum. Indul. Jeed. Her. Big. Stories. Of. Battle. The berserker paused for a few moments before he let out a more genuine chuckle. Would. Dote. On. Gwyn. Dolan. Overbearing older sister, was she? David chuckled, which managed to elicit a small, almost imperceptible, laugh from Havel in response. Havel Helm gave a slow nod in response. Proba. Bly. Better. She. Died. His arms uncrossed themselves from in front of him. Fa. There. Dead. Broth. Dead. Sis. Tear. Never. Visited. He looked down, gently kicking at the sand with his right foot. The Grail or whatever it was had been slowly providing with trickles of information of events which occurred after his death. None of which painted a particularly pleasing picture for him. It wasn't anywhere close to the level of information he needed for a complete world view, but it was still more than enough for him. Hard. She was. He stopped when David gently rested a hand on his shoulder. Hovel stared at the limb and then towards Archer, the man giving him a sympathetic smile as the two stood there in silence. Hovel turned away as David removed the hand from his shoulder and the two stared out across the ocean as a comfortable silence descended. Archer hadn't strayed far from the camp. The servant had immediately gone back to assuming a watchful gaze upon the horizon. Although he wasn't so preoccupied that he didn't hear Boudica stomping towards him. Looking over his shoulder, he saw the red-haired rider make her not so subtle approach with a scowl on her face. "Dear me." Archer gave a mirthless chuckle, not bothering to turn around to fully face the approaching servant. "Have I earned the queen's ire in some way?" "Wise ass." Boudica cut him off, stopping and crossing her arms in front of her chest. What was that supposed to be? Archer's expression didn't change in the least despite being cut off. All he granted her in return was a slightly raised eyebrow. "To what do you refer? My comments or Saber's admission that he can justify anything if he has reason enough for it?" Boudica's eyes narrowed in annoyance at the servant. "You know as well as I do that he has known nothing beyond that way of life. He's outright admitted that his time spent in Chaldea currently dwarfs his actual time spent in his world, so there was no need for that." The rider soon began to tap her boot into the sand repeatedly, forming a subtle rhythm which underlined the conversation. "Did I come across as insulting?" Archer mused. "That was not my intention. I was actually complimenting his determination. To be able to walk over those in between him and his objective without caring for them in the least is just the sort of determination that is needed right about now." "Then what was, because none of you seemed to grasp it?" Archer scoffed. "Not until he outright admitted it. Until this point you all thought of him as the same sort of servant as the rest of you. He committed deeds and has a great deal of pride in them or something along those lines, or that he was perhaps something more than a simple killer." Archer stared at her with a blank expression. "That's exactly what he is. The perfect servant that can be summoned for any master. Point him at an enemy and watch him go. That's not his fault and you know it." Her boot stopped tapping as her entire form tightened up, her tone becoming hot. "And I don't see how you get to question anyone's way of life." "Oh no," Archer shook his head. "I'm quite possibly the worst type of person to comment on how he lives or rather, lived. Indeed, in defense of humanity what they really need is someone who would ignore everything for the big picture." His lips contorted into a heavy scowl. "But this fascination with treating him as if he is anything more than a weapon will ultimately cause you more harm than anything else. Better to just treat him like a tool." Boudica bristled. "Would you want to be treated like a tool?" "That is exactly what servants are." Archer shrugged. "Tools for our masters to use as they please. It just so happens that Saber fits the bill perfectly. Give him a good enough reason and he'd likely walk over 1,000 corpses if it meant his mission was achieved." A snort escaped him. "And he seems to have no aspirations beyond it. Neither shame nor pride in his achievements. He does it because he was told to and that's it." Boudica leveled her finger towards him. "He's known nothing but that way of life and that doesn't mean he can't learn something different." "Is that what you're going to do?" Archer mused with a wry smile. "Teach Saber the joy of living before he gets desummoned and all that hard work goes to waste?" He shook his head. "No, the moment he found out about that he'd likely refuse to consider it. You've already seen how much he dislikes Drake." "Drake is an acquired taste," Boudica dryly replied. "And she isn't the only one." Oscar didn't agree with her. "But he didn't make several attempts on her life," Archer pointed out. "Neither did Hovel, who we all believed was the biggest concern amongst us." He remained silent before shrugging. "But go ahead. If you wish to waste your time in teaching him to be human when all that hard work will go to waste, go ahead." "It won't be a waste," Boudica declared, fixing Archer with a stern glare, "because it doesn't matter how short it is. He will actually want to do something because he wants to. Not because he was commanded, or told, or ordered or whatever." She then relaxed herself. "But maybe I won't be the one to teach him. Maybe Master and Mash can do that better than me." "Ho!" Archer raised an eyebrow. "Of course." Boudica smirked at Archer. "In case you haven't noticed, that boy isn't your typical master. I think he could do it." Archer stared at her for a few moments before his lips thinned. She probably wasn't wrong. That boy already had the hallmarks of being a naive fool. He was a mediocre mage and an average master so far. But he was a good kid who probably wouldn't leave well enough alone. His lip twitched slightly at an old memory of another fool. His eyes briefly darted away from Boudica and towards the direction of the camp. Well, that is up to him, he settled with, giving Boudica one last glance before he turned away. Still, if you think it's worth it, go ahead, I won't stop you. Boudica gave a single determined nod as she turned and walked away, only to be stopped by Archer's parting words. Don't feel too bad if it doesn't work though, he warned, and don't blame yourselves for it. By the time Ritska and Mash returned to the camp, it was already dark with the moon gradually climbing into the sky. Ash was still by the remnants of the campfire, kicking Kin over the top of the ashes before he turned to see the two of them approach. Was your walk pleasant? Was the first thing he asked in a tone that made it clear that he was genuinely curious if their walk was actually pleasant for them. Ran into the caster again, Ritska explained as he reached up and rubbed his left eye, the one from Rome. Ash frowned and looked towards Mash. They were not hostile? No, Ash-san. Mash shook her head in response. But they said if we met them a third time, they'd give us their true name. Ah. Ash nodded his head. That would prove useful. He agreed before looking around the camp. The others have either moved off to rest for the night or assumed watch. He frowned. Boudica went to speak with Archer regarding the conversation, but I do not see the need for it. That's so. Ritska stretched out his arms as he could feel weariness begin to take hold of him. All right. A yawn escaped the master's lips as he rubbed his eyes once again, blinking several times, feeling a little tired. It is understandable, you have been hard at work during the day. Ash gestured towards the few tents that had been set up for the crew to sleep in while repairs to the ship were ongoing. You can and Mash can rest. I will stand guard for the night to ensure nothing approaches. Are you sure you also don't want to try and rest, Ash-san? Mash queried with a slight hint of concern as she approached the saber. The servant gave her a curious look before he shook his head in response. I have never been able to sleep, unlike Sigward, he added on in remembrance of the Onion Knight. In truth, it still surprised him how the man was able to sleep at all. Ash had never been able to find the compulsion within himself to rest out of his own will. How Sigward had managed to do so at all was a surprise. Although the fact the man had also been robbed while he rested made Ash slightly thankful that he wasn't under the same restriction. So you need not worry about me. I have not slept since I was summoned. Ritska gave 2 blinks in response before his features flattened. All right then. I'm afraid I don't have the same resilience you do. Ash gave him a blank look in response. I see, slowly nodding his head in understanding, or misunderstanding in this particular instance. That is unfortunate. He got a slight cringe in response as Ritska debated whether or not to tell Ash he wasn't being serious. Yeah, Ritska eventually decided upon with an, albeit shaky, look on his face. Real envy right there. Giving a final stretch, Ritska made his way towards the direction of one of the tents before pausing, slowly staring at each of the identical setups with his arm bent up at his waist and a strained look on his face. Ash wordlessly pointed towards the tent on the far end of the camp. Ritska gave him a grateful nod of his head and a tired smile before he turned and made his way towards it. Mash followed in his wake with a similar smile of gratitude directed towards the saber as she stopped just outside his tent, realizing that she likely couldn't sleep in the same area as him. Giving a raised eyebrow at the bizarre antics, Ash gave a dismissive shrug and turned back to standing guard near the remains of the campsite. It was around midnight when Oscar eventually returned to the camp. The knight's entire posture was slackened and uncaring as he dragged his way towards the embers of the fire, catching sight of Ash standing stock still and staring across the beach. You did not mention the ringed city was full of hollows. Oscar pointed out quietly when he was in earshot. Ash slowly turned his head to stare at the knight as they approached him. Oscar moved at a slow pace until he stood but a few feet from the saber and stood still. Why? Would it have mattered? Ash tilted his head. The act itself remains the same. The city is gone and any chance for repair died with it. He paused, turning his full body towards Oscar and thinning his lips. Besides, there was a good portion of undead that remained rather than true hollows. I suspect that if the flame was relit, The undead curse would have been broken and the city would have been able to recover to some extent. The death of Filianor ended that possibility. Oscar continued to stare at him in silence before a heavy sigh passed through the man's lips. If it were not a city of hollows, would you have done the same? Yes. Ash nodded his head eventually. The end result was the same either way. The dark soul is retrieved and the painter will craft a new world with it. It likely would have been more challenging, but there is no great difference beyond the time it takes for me to achieve my objective. I see. Oscar slowly nodded his head, shoulders slackened. Do you believe that such a cost would be worth it? The world painted with the dark soul will not be bound by the curse. Ash gestured to the remains of the fire, untouched by all the flames brought with them. I was told it would be a soothing home for some. For that purpose, I believe it is entirely meaningful. Otherwise I would not have done it. Then, Oscar let out a shaky breath. A world free of the curse, you said? I suppose it is a trivial thing in comparison to the city's lost dead. The knight continued to walk on before pausing. Forgive my earlier words. It took some time for the information to become available to me. Regardless of whether you would have done the same to a living city, the fact was this ringed city was full of hollows. I was informed the Grail would provide information to servants. Ash paused, his arms still by his side before he turned his head to look at Oscar's back. How much information does it grant you? Some. Oscar gave a so-so gesture with his hand. Enough for me to know those I travel with. Did you know she will be a knight? Who? Francis Drake. Oscar gave an empty wheeze, moving his left hand to cradle his head. Sir Francis Drake. I remember being told that knighthood was the highest honor and that when inducted into it, you should act with grace befitting your role. Ash stared at Oscar before his eyes turned towards the embers of the camp with a troubled look growing upon his face. That. I am not a knight. So I cannot comment upon that feat, but her way of life is unacceptable in my eyes. Her acts benefit nothing and will inevitably all be meaning. She routed an armada. Oscar quietly revealed, turning back to Ash and seeing the unkindled slowly nod his head. You were aware? Boudica saw fit to enlighten me. His head traveled towards the direction of Francis Drake's tent and stared at it for a long period of time. All I've seen of greed and indulgence is lives brought to ruin and monsters born of the flesh. So how did she achieve something so grandeur? Oscar gave a mirthless huff, turning away from Ash and continuing towards the shoreline. I don't know. I truly do not know. She's a fiend who steals to her heart's content, cares for little beyond the discovery of her next treasure and is fully willing to indulge herself at the cost of others. The Astoran stared across the ocean, his shoulders slumped in defeat. So how then, did she achieve more than one such as I while acting upon every sin imaginable? Raising his hands to stare at them, Oscar clenched his fists. Perhaps it was conviction. Conviction and greed? Ash curled his lip in distaste. That does not seem possible. Or at the very least, should not have allowed her to live to achieve anything positive. And yet she did. Oscar's hands dropped back to his sides. What does that say about us? Or me? I strove to uphold every noble ideal drilled within me since the moment I became a knight. And I hollowed like a common undead fool. Shaking his head, the knight continued on his walk. Forgive me. I became distracted in myself. I will patrol along the beach in case of more beasts. Very well. I will remain here. Ash nodded his head towards the back of the retreating knight. Neither of them had much to say in response to Drake's status as a knight. Ash himself couldn't comprehend how a woman seemingly devoid of duty could create such an impact upon the world itself. He stared down at the blackened embers buried by the sand with his face set in a mask. It wasn't right. It wasn't a correct way of life and it shouldn't have had such a profound impact. Yet, somehow, it did. The end result was acceptable, but he could never understand the path to get to it. No, rather the motivation itself was unacceptable. Thy face ashen one. Her lips were parted in a clear show of surprise. Even her shoulders had jolted at the shock. Thou art. You frequently did much the same. The smile fades from his lips. It was a small thing and fleeting in its existence. Yet she could have felt it all the same. Perhaps that was the link between Firekeeper and Unkindled. I was curious how it would feel. I understand. However, 'twas unexpected to see thy visage setteth in such a way. She replies with a tone of clear surprise. However, her posture relaxes into its usual way. 'Twas not unwelcome. His own smiling makes her feel better. It's unusual, but it does not impact him all that much. Then again, his own feelings should be irrelevant. Whether or not he smiles will have no impact on the success of his mission. But it makes her comfortable. No, rather, it made her happy. What a strange thing to consider, that such a small deed could bring her joy. It's a trivial deed just to smile when he greets her, hardly something to be considered in the least as wasteful. If it makes her time here more bearable, then it is acceptable. There is no great harm in making her more comfortable when he is around. They are both bound by this duty, there is no reason why it should be unpleasant for either of them. So, he'll smile more. It makes her comfortable, so there is at least meaning in the act to some degree. It won't affect his duty in a negative way, so there is no harm in it. It's only a smile. A twitch of the expression. There's no greater meaning behind it for him, so it is fine. I hope I have not woken you roughly. Ritska jolted at the concerned voice, shooting up and instantly cringing at the rays of sunlight that assaulted his face. The master rubbed his eyes to attempt to adjust to the brightness, only to find himself staring at the young face of a red-haired woman with bright blue eyes. Her features were soft and youthful, with her crimson red hair set in a braided bun. Ritska squinted his eyes at the woman before his still sleepy mouth moved faster than his brain. Who are you? The woman flushed slightly in embarrassment, which Ritska found disarmingly adorable, as she seemed to jolt in realization. Forgive me. I realize we spoke with my features hidden. Straightening herself out, Ritska quickly became aware of the iron armor she wore with the lion-headed helmet gripped just underneath the crook of her right arm. It is I, she loudly declared, with Ritska wincing at the volume, punctuated with a thump on the chest with her free hand. Sir Sanora of Haida. Fu's head popped up from next to Ritska's. The white animal's face was scrunched up in a tired grimace aimed towards the night, which quickly devolved into an irritated scowl. Fuyu. The animal stretched itself while glaring at the lancer. The woman stared at the small animal and felt an involuntary shiver run up her spine before fidgeting. I was too loud, wasn't I? She tapped the tips of her fingers together repeatedly as she sent a slightly ashamed look towards Ritska, bowing her head low. I apologize for that. Her head rose as she took a single step out of the tent. I merely wished to wake you. The others are already up and preparing for departure. I will see to Milady Artemis and her muse. Right. Ritska gave a quick wave of his hand and he stretched himself out. Thanks for the wake up, by the way. He quickly nodded to her, which earned him a satisfied smile in response before the lancer placed the helmet back upon her head and ducked out of the tent. Releasing a sigh, Ritska pulled himself up as he noticed Fu staring up at him with a flat look. I know you probably wanted to sleep longer, but we do technically have a job to do, Fu. Fu, if you stop complaining, you can ride on Mash's shoulder for the rest of the voyage. Ritska offered with a smug smile as he watched the animal's expression freeze before its eyes narrowed in a thoughtful manner. Giving Ritska an appraising look as if judging the value of his word, Fu eventually gave a single nod of his head before skipping out of the tent. I hope Mash isn't bothered by that, he muttered to himself as he rubbed his eyes and made for his Mystic Code uniform. I hope she isn't anyway. Quickly getting changed, Ritska threw the tent flap open and stepped out onto the beach, quickly giving his sleeve a shake and displacing a thin covering of sand on his clothes. His lips quirked into a resigned frown. That's about what I expected. Sand in your clothes? David chuckled as he walked past Ritska with a few of their supplies tucked under his arms. Don't worry, I think it annoys even those who grew up in a desert. He shivered. I hate sand. It's coarse, rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. Ritska stared at David in suspicion. How much knowledge does the Grail give you? David sent him a conspiratorial smile. Who knows? He let out an amused laugh as he wandered away from Ritska. Best hurry along. The captain sometimes gets impatient in the mornings. Although she hasn't had a drink yet, so she might be alright. Ritska wasn't sure if having an early morning drink was really the kind of thing people needed to be reasonable. If he was being honest, it sounded as though the opposite was true. How's it looking? Drake questioned as she approached the ship. Oscar looked down from his standing place upon the scaffolding with a small but confident smile. Drake whistled at the expression and cracked a smirk. That well, huh? Well enough given our rush. Oscar admitted with a slight shrug as he turned back towards the hole, moving some of the strips of wyvern hide to cover the planks of wood. But the repairs are coming along. I would give us an hour before we are at least able to sail without fear of sinking. He paused, humming as he bobbed his head from side to side in thought. Perhaps an hour and a half. Good work. Drake nodded her head to the man. Wouldn't mind having someone as handy as you on my ship for a lot longer. Oscar stopped his movements and glanced at Drake through the corner of his eye. I'm sure you'd find someone better, he steadily replied as he lifted the next beam of wood and held it in place for the crew to hammer in. Besides, I doubt I would make a good fit amongst your crew. Fair enough. Drake nodded her head in understanding, crossing her arms and leaning to the side. Probably too much of a chivalric sort, ain't ya? Ha ha ha. Oscar released a quiet laugh in response. You say that as if I am somehow burdened by it. You are. Drake pointed out, snapping her finger to point at him. You'll never get the chance to experience certain things because your code won't let you. She shifted her finger to point at herself. I don't have that kind of restriction. For the most part. I should point out that it is the duty of Astoran knights to apprehend criminals. Oscar nodded his head towards her. I believe you would fit the category quite well. Funny. Rolling her eyes, Drake dismissively waved her hand. But it's your choice if that's what you want to do with your life or whatever. Just try to have some kind of ambition, yeah. I did have an ambition once, Oscar admitted. It did not work out well for me. Just means you gotta try harder to make sure it does next time. Drake gave a shrug and walked away. Doesn't always work out, but that's what makes it an ambition, hollering back to him as she walked about the camp. Oscar turned his head to watch her depart before releasing a heavy sigh and turning back to the repairs. Easier said than achieved, I am afraid. That's just boss. The crew member next to him offered as way of consolation as he hammered away at the nails. She just outright does the impossible. The man paused mid-strike as he considered something. Hang on. Can you actually achieve the impossible? Because technically if y'all achieve the impossible, it weren't impossible to begin with. Oscar stared at him with a thoughtful expression behind his helm. Is that not simply improbable then? He pondered aloud. Right? The crewman nodded his head, placing his hand on his hip and scratching his chin with the hammer. But saying someone achieves the improbable ain't as impressive, is it? I suppose not. Well, just don't let it get yaw down. The man shrugged. I'm sure she'll see us through. Oscar wordlessly hummed as he grabbed the next patch of scales and held them up, peeling back the armored sections and exposing the skin as the man lined up the next nail. It didn't take Ritzka long to catch sight of Mash. The shielder was already stood near Ash, and surprisingly Asterios, with the trio already being engaged in a conversation. Blinking once, he shrugged his shoulders and approached the trio stood outside a rather large tent which he immediately guessed to belong to Urieli. Fu skipped by at his feet as he closed in on the group, the furry creature immediately making their way towards Mash. It'll take some time for the ship to be prepared. He could hear Ash as he closed in, the saber speaking towards Asterios with a usual toneless voice to him. Although it is more for your strength than anything else that you will be required. Given the goddess's claim to you, I had hoped to pass along the message that she might have to make do with another form of rest. Asterios gave a single nod, although his expression seemed slightly saddened by the reveal. Understand. He shifted his body, almost fidgeting nervously before speaking again. Have more glowing soup? He questioned with an almost hopeful tone to him. Ritzka almost face faulted before his lips quirked themselves into a small smile. We don't, Asterios-san. Mash shook her head, her own expression slightly saddened. I could try and ask Chaldea to dispatch some to us next time we need a resupply if there's time. The girl added on when Asterios' posture seemed to shrink in disappointment. The latter part made him perk up slightly. Ash stared at Asterios with a mildly intrigued look. I have noticed that you appeared taken with Estes. Why? He asked, gesturing the Minotaur up and down. Unlike myself, you are still entirely capable of tasting food. Why do you limit yourself to a tasteless substance? He paused, moving his hand to cradle his chin in thought. Unless it was the healing properties that you required, in which case it is understandable. Healing? Asterios blinked, tilting his head in honest confusion. It heals? You were not aware? Ash stared in surprise before gesturing to himself. Unkindled like myself and undead require Estus for face-paced healing where spells are not an option. Its rejuvenating qualities for injuries are matched only by miracles. He paused and lowered his hand. Admittedly, Sigward appears to be limited in the ability to craft Estus with the materials on hand, and without a bonfire it is a paltry amount compared to its original ability. Mash turned her head to stare at Ash in surprise. It is a healing potion? I suppose I felt better after drinking some in France, but I did not know it was an alchemical potion. Her eyes widened in realization. Has Sigward-san been making healing pancakes? In some manner of speaking, yes. Ash nodded his head in affirmation, although it will not be able to instantly recover stab wounds as it used to. That's amazing. Mash positively exclaimed. It means that Chaldean staff can enjoy unhealthy foods while also being healed at the same time. It does not cure poisons. Ash shook his head, it only heals the damage they do over a certain period of time. Although what you have spoken to me about, he scrunched his face up in thought, dietary problems. I think she means fast foods and the like. Ritsuka interrupted as he approached. Mash turned to him and gave a warm smile and a nod of her head. Go ahead, Fu. Fu. The animal seized the chance, leaping upwards and landing perfectly upon Mash's shoulder, causing the girl to let out an eep of surprise at suddenly being turned into a climbing frame. Fu-san. Mash stared at the animal in shock, then turned her attention to Ritsuka as she moved her right hand across herself to pet the small animal. Senpei, what? Made a deal with Fu, he got upset that Lancer woke him up. Ritsuka explained with a wave of his hand, told him he could ride on your shoulder. Hope you don't mind. Mash gave him a shake of her head, smiling warmly at Fu. I don't mind, Senpei, although it might be best if he stay with you during combat situations. Probably. Ritsuka agreed easily, giving Fu a wry smile. I don't think he'd do all that well in a fight, would you, Fu? Fu leveled him with a thoroughly unimpressed glance before letting loose a tiny huff and turning his nose up at the master. Ritsuka stared at Fu and then turned to Ash and Asterios while still pointing at the creature. Did I just get snubbed? Ash and Asterios looked at each other and then turned back to Ritsuka before giving equally unsure shrugs. The master sighed, shaking his head before looking at Asterios and giving him a smile. Morning, Asterios. Realize we haven't spoken all that much since we started traveling together. Asterios stared at him. His brows furrowed slightly as a hint of confusion drifted across his face. You want to speak with me? Well, I thought it would be a bit rude if I never said a word to you. Ritsuka pointed out, reaching up to scratch the back of his neck. Just wanted to make sure you were all right, given that we are all traveling together and in case anyone was holding a grudge or something. Asterios shook his head, his lip twitching slightly. Fine. Not lonely. He raised his right arm and pointed over his shoulder towards Euryale's tent. Have company? I imagine she's doing all right. Ritsuka snorted, crossing his arms. I know I arranged for her to be able to speak with Gwendolyn yesterday. I assume she was able to. Nodding his head, Asterios' lips curled into a minute smile. She was happier. That's good. Ritsuka let out a sigh of relief as he turned back around. Well, I'll let you get back on with whatever you were doing. I imagine that Euryale is likely one who doesn't enjoy being woken up so early in the morning like everyone else. He chuckled out, then froze when the tent flap behind Asterios was violently swung open and the goddess stepped outside. She most certainly does not. Euryale narrowed her eyes at the group, placing her hands on her hips. Haven't you ever heard of the concept of letting a woman get her beauty sleep? Pausing. The goddess placed a hand on her chest and gave a smug smile. Not that I need it, of course, but the principle remains. Haven't you all some grunt work to do? That is, in part, why we are here. Ash gestured to Asterios. We might have need of his strength and I had hoped to ask you if it was acceptable to request his aid. Euryale opened her mouth to respond before she closed it again and gave Ash a piercing look. And why would you need my permission? He has assumed the role of your guardian, therefore all he truly need concern himself with is your protection. Ash explained easily. I had hoped you would grant him a brief leave of his duty so that he could aid us, but it is acceptable if you do not. Why not ask Asterios? She crossed her arms and leaned to one side, looking Ash up and down and then towards the berserker. He's my protector, not my slave. She paused. Unless you count him as being a slave to my obvious beauty. Will help. If you want. Asterios gently cut her off as he nodded to Ritsuka. All right. Yeah. Ritska enthusiastically replied, grinning up at the berserker. We'd be more than happy for the help. We'll let you know if anything pops up. He paused, turning around and staring towards the ship. Should probably get back and do something before Drake comes to try and fetch me. Mash nodded her head in agreement. It would also speed up the repairs so we could try and locate Blackbeard and reclaim the Grail. She helpful added on. Ritska snapped his fingers and pointed to her. That too. That is all I came for. Ash nodded his head to the group in parting as he turned away. We'll speak later. Yeah, Ritska nodded to him. We will. An. Repairs almost complete. That means next chapter we take off to the high seas. Also, no one was judging Ash for his actions. It was the complete lack of emotion he described them with along with the little context he provided. Most heroes have some level of pride or achievement. Ash doesn't, because why would you take pride in doing what someone asked you to? He basically revealed that he doesn't care all that much as to how many he kills so long as he achieves what he set out to do, and it is something with meaning behind it. It wasn't to make him look evil or make everyone look like assholes or whatever. It was to show how utterly clinical Ash's way of thinking truly is, because he literally doesn't know any better. Chapter 68. Storm Brawl. Hurry up, scumbags. Drake shouted out as she marched through the ship. The crew members were stumbling around as Asterios and Havel pushed the Golden Hind away from the shoreline and back out to sea. Get those sails raised. We shall be underway soon then. Oscar remarked as he leaned against the ship's railings for support. His helm briefly scanned the crew complement before they landed on the figure closest to him. You seem to be taking this situation quite well, Sir Kyrielite. He mused with a nod of his head. Mash physically recoiled as if struck by the comment before she shook her head. I am not a Sir Oscar-san. I don't know if being possessed by a heroic spirit grants me their titles or not. Her expression turned downcast as she stared at her armored gauntlets. Besides, I do not know the heroic spirit's name. I see. Oscar slowly nodded his head. I am sure the answer will come to you in time. Thank you. Mash gave a smile in thanks, although it held a slight tinge of doubt to it. Oscar stared at her for a few moments in silence before he straightened himself out, turning his body to face her. That is a dour look upon your face. Mash blinked, sore. It is not one I find offensive. Oscar shook his head, swiftly cutting off her attempt at an apology. He looked around the ship, staring at all those assembled before raising his arm in a sweeping gesture. They're all quite incredible, aren't they? They are. Mash agreed easily. We're lucky to have so many servants on our side. When I stand next to such persons, I cannot help but feel as though I am not quite on their level. Oscar admitted with a quiet sigh, turning away from Mash. It is a shock. As if I am surrounded by legends from my childhood. Did you read about stories growing up, Oscar-san? Mash inquired as she walked closer to him, stopping next to him and placing her own hands on the railings. Oscar nodded his head in response. Indeed. My favorite was always the tale of Ferris. He spoke in a reminiscent tone bordering on amusement. He was a human archer, but his skill with a bow. He shook his head. Sir Ash told me you encountered the legendary Hawkeye Goff, did you not? Oh, yes. Mash nodded her head, her eyes wide with childish glee. I'd never thought I'd see a giant, but he was amazing. Oscar released a warm chuckle in response. I imagine he would be. But Ferris was said to equal the legendary knight with pure skill alone. He remained silent as the statement set in. Could you imagine it? Just a normal human like myself being able to compete with a giant who could shoot dragons down from the sky. Mash shook her head before pausing. Some heroic spirits' legends are incredible. Pausing, the girl reached up and rubbed her arm. It does feel a little strange to be beside them at times. Like you've cheated your way there. Oscar distantly commented, jolting and shaking his head. Forgive me. I meant no offense towards you. He assured her with a wave of his hand. The one who granted you their power must have seen something to be nurtured. Indeed, you are still young, aren't you? He queried towards her. I'm only 15, Oscar-san. She replied, fidgeting slightly as he turned to stare down at her. She could feel the raised eyebrow he held behind his helmet. But I'll be 16 in a month. She helpfully supplied, as if it didn't change the fact she was still barely above a child. I'd only just left to join the Knights at that age. Oscar didn't seem as though he cared in the least, however, instead taking on a nostalgic tone. You have a bright future ahead of you then. I would not feel as inferior to those around you. He reached out and gave her a pat on the shoulder before retracting his arm. Unlike me. He trailed off, his hand curling slightly before falling limply at his side. I don't know about that. Mash frowned at Oscar. You still were able to make it to the throne of heroes. She pointed out, you're a servant just like everyone else. Not like them. Oscar released an ugly snort. Not at all like them. Dreams they had which might have been achieved or dreams they have yet to achieve. A weary sigh escaped him. All I can say is that I stumbled upon the first hurdle in my quest and lost my will to carry on. You're here now, Oscar-san. Mash affirmed to him, earning a side-helm look from the knight. I'm sure you can be a big help. When I find myself surrounded by the likes of Havel the bishop. Oscar shook his head. No, I doubt that very much. He paused, releasing a hum. It seems I have answered a question I held for some time though. What question? I cannot hollow, for I would have surely done so by now. His laugh was empty. How strange. Muttering to himself, he shook his head and turned away from Mash. I will not burden you further. We have to prepare for our encounter with Blackbeard. Oscar-san. Mash stopped him. I'm certain you'll find something you can do. What have you? The shielder blinked at the sudden question, her brows furrowed in confusion as Oscar turned his head to stare at her. The dreams of the others are known to me, but what of you? Dream? Mash blinked several times, opening and closing her mouth repeatedly before she answered. Is a dream important? To undead, it is invaluable. Oscar replied. More often than not, a dream or desire is what could keep us going. A desire and a will to fulfill it. Be it a desire to fulfill a duty or a dream to see through. Had you been like myself, perhaps you might indeed have hollowed. I want to be a good servant for Senpei. That is a duty to fulfill. Oscar shook his head. Perhaps you are not so different from Sir Ash. That is if he has a want of his own. What do you mean? Mash stepped closer, tilting her head in confusion. Doesn't Ash-san want to help? A want is born of personal feelings. Oscar corrected. Whether or not you can agree with some of them, they all originate within ourselves. I wanted to realize a grand destiny for myself. It was an ambition I held, and perhaps my first failure was a realization they were but the dreams of a fool. Perhaps you will find an ambition of your own, or perhaps you will not. He trailed off, his helm lowered so as to stare her in the eyes. But if you have an ambition you want realized. His tone was stern. Be sure that you have the will to see it through. Mash stared at him in silence, her eyes still holding a glimmer of confusion within them as the saber turned away from her and moved across the ship, remaining stationary for a few moments before her expression scrunched up into a troubled one. She wanted to be a good servant so that Senpei could rely upon her, but wasn't that the duty of all servants? Shaking her head, she moved through the ship, still unable to get the small question in the back of her head out. She had seen what Ash was truly about, the performance of a servant without question if the action made sense, but did he have anything he wanted beyond that? She didn't know, but she knew she didn't know much about a lot of things. A dream to realize and the will to see it through. She stumbled as the ship swerved to the side. Several people loudly cursed on deck to match with the heavy thump of bodies hitting the deck. Instantly manifesting her shield, Mash swung around to look for potential attackers. Warn us next time you're gonna swing the ship, asshole. Only to falter when she caught sight of Drake leaning over the railings and violently swearing at someone. Nearly fell on my face. She then pointed down towards whoever it was. And what the ship? We just fixed it. Why can't you be more like Asterios? He's calm when he moves the ship and does it slowly as well. She's speaking to Havel-san. She realized with a nod of the head, the berserker obviously being responsible for the ship's sudden change in direction. Lowering her shield, she allowed it to vanish into motes of light. Releasing a breath she didn't know she had been holding. Someone get a ladder. Drake cut herself off, assuming a thinker's pose before shaking her head and dismissing an idea. On second thought, drop the anchor for him. Doubt the ladder will take either of their weight. The heavy rattling of chains followed by a splash of water indicated that the anchor had indeed been dropped for Havel and Asterios. Mash braced herself for the ship to inevitably lurch when either of them began to climb. They'll see us coming leagues away on open water. Drake stated as she leaned against a barrel, her arms crossed and her expression tight. So, anyone got any ideas? Can we not just sail towards them? Ash asked in questioning before he paused at the blank looks he received from everyone around him. Is that not an option? I mean, Drake scratched her chin, humming in thought. Cannons blazing, and that might confuse them long enough for us to get close alongside and board them, wouldn't it? Mash shook her head. I don't believe so. Given the presence of servants on board, they will likely spot us at a great distance and the cannons will barely serve as a distraction to them. The shielder's lips turned into a troubled frown. I do not believe that plan will work. You are actually describing that as a plan? Romani blurted out loud. He literally just said the equivalent of walking up to them. Ash, Oscar, Havel and Sanora were all pointedly silent as they all looked around in silence, not meeting the eyes of anyone present. Ritska snorted, reaching up and rubbing the bridge of his nose. All right then. So we can cross off just sailing towards them. What about during a storm? Mash suggested. We could wait for a wild hunt. That's hoping for too much. Drake rejected. Besides, who knows how long we'd be waiting for one to form and how long it would last. She frowned before turning to Ash, Archer and Artemis. You three use bows, can't you help distract them as well? I could make the attempt. Ash admitted, turning to Oscar. I could gift you a simple longbow and some arrows. Oscar nodded his head. Artemis gave a simple nod of her head and hummed, then tightened her hold on Orion as he was busy staring at Sanora without her helmet on. Don't they still have us outgunned though? Ritska asked, looking around the gathering of servants and then towards the screen with Romani and Olga present. Wasn't Blackbeard's noble phantasm quite powerful? It was. Romani grimly nodded his head. Combined with the presence of multiple servants, even if they are down one, the noble phantasm can still outmatch whatever power you could use against Blackbeard. If he sees you coming straight towards him, I'd say a sensible servant would immediately use it. Given their last encounter, how likely do you actually think that is? Olga dryly retorted. Romani gave a hapless shrug. I did say sensible. The man pointed out with a strained smile. But anyway, as it stands, the noble phantasm represents the biggest problem to you. If you were able to get in close, you might be able to match them with the quantity of servants you have available. So we would need a greater distraction then? Sanora hummed, scratching her chin. I confess I am, unfortunately, inexperienced with such matters. Why doesn't someone just board the ship and cause a big distraction beforehand? Artemis tilted her head, placing a single finger on her chin. David blinked twice, his smile faltering slightly as he and Romani shared similar expressions of perplexity. How exactly would someone board Blackbeard's ship beforehand? The man questioned with a raised eyebrow. Adding on to that, how would they even be able to board undetected and then escape? Romani added on with a puzzled expression. We don't have very many servants who are that stealthy, and even an assassin would have problems getting to it. Just ignore her. Orion waved his hand in the goddess' direction with an exhausted face. Sometimes she says silly things like that. How it's not like we have anyone who can casually just walk across to. He trailed off, his features flattening before he slowly turned his head to stare at Artemis' proud smile. You're serious, aren't you? Yep, Artemis enthusiastically replied. I think it will work, darling. How is it that you suddenly come up with these bizarre schemes whenever it directly relates to me? Because it will make you look cool. Terrific. Care to share? Drake raised an eyebrow at the bear. Orion gave a heavy sigh before turning to face the pirate. Despite appearances, I am still a servant. He explained with a shrug. I still have access to most of my basic skills. Like my ability to walk on water. Ah, yes. Uriah commented as if in remembrance, looking up from her nails and giving Orion a mildly intrigued look. You're the son of Lord Poseidon, aren't you? Drake whistled, looking away while David and Oscar looked equally ready to not pay attention to the bear. Havel slowly turned his head to stare down at the furry toy. The clear aura of disbelief that emanated from him had Orion throw up his hands in annoyance. I know it ain't the best power, all right? He turned towards Boudica. I'm feeling down. Please comfort me and your boss. Artemis' hand tightened around his head, earning a mildly amused look from the red-haired rider. I would like to retract my earlier statement. Oh darling. You keep making these strange comments and people might misunderstand something. You mean that you're actually likely to kill someone over a petty insult? Orion blurted out. Artemis remained silent as she continued to hold onto the bear's head, then slowly began to tighten her grip. All right. Give. Moving on. Archer coughed into his hands, turning the attention of the group away from the bizarre display. Assuming Orion can actually board Blackbeard's ship without being detected, there would still be considerable ground for him to cover. He raised an eyebrow, and it doesn't exactly look like he has speed on his side. Ritska frowned in thought, giving a small hum before his eyes fell upon something. They then narrowed before widening as an epiphany came to him. His head snapped in the direction of Artemis and Orion. How durable is Orion? Orion and Artemis blinked. The two of them stared at each other before staring at Ritska. Well, I am a bit tougher than your average teddy bear. Orion hesitantly replied with a growing sense of dread. Why? Ritska's eyes trailed up to Artemis. How would you feel if I suggested a plan that might get Orion hurt? Artemis frowned, narrowing her eyes at Ritska. Are you going to hurt darling on purpose? No, on purpose. Ritska quickly replied, but it might hurt him, depending on how much damage he can take. It can change really easily. Senpai? Mash tilted her head, leaning forwards. You have a plan? Kind of. Ritska replied in a strained voice, pointing towards the item which had birthed his idea. I'm not claiming it to be a very good one. The eyes of everyone trailed to where Ritska was pointing, Havel himself giving a confused grunt as he looked between the item and Ritska. Romani and Olga looked through the screen before the former choked back a laugh as he seemingly came to the same idea as Ritska. Really, Fujimaru-kun? Romani managed to get out between disbelieving chuckles. That's your plan? What? Olga blinked, staring at Romani and then staring at Ritska. Her expression gradually turned into a mixture of annoyance and puzzlement. What's his plan? What is he suggesting? Archer stared longer before he released a heavy sigh, moving his right hand up to cradle his forehead. I have to hand it to you, master. He commented, shaking his head and giving Ritska an incredulous expression. That is certainly an unorthodox plan you have come up with. Ritska returned his look with a lopsided smile and a half shrug. What? Orion started to sweat as he looked around. What plan? What plan have you come up with, and what's with this terrible feeling I'm currently experiencing? Rendell looked across the deck towards Blackbeard. His expression turned into a slight frown as he reached out and grabbed hold of Halflight's collar as he walked past, stopping the man in his tracks. How long has he been like that? Halflight turned his head to stare at Blackbeard before his expression tightened into a frown. Several hours, I believe. The man gave a huff and shook himself free of Rendell before continuing on. He's been fantasizing again. Rolling his eyes in exasperation, Rendell turned away and made his way over to Blackbeard, passing by Anne and Mary as he did so. The pair looked equally disgusted by Teach as he closed in. Edward. Uriah-Lee-chan, Blackbeard sang out. Uriah-Lee-chan. Wherefore art thou, Uriah-Lee-chan? Edward. Rendell called out again, crossing his arms in front of him and repeatedly tapping his boot against the deck. Captain. Wherefore art thy feet so tender and supple? Thy skin but a delicate flower, thy eyes but glittering jewels, thy lips are tender pillows. Rendell lifted his right hand to cover his face while moving his left to rest upon his hips, exhaling loudly into his palm before removing his hand. Captain Teach, he paused, staring out and eventually opening his mouth again. Good heavens, is that the delicate Uriah-Lee-chan of legend? His voice was dry enough that it would make a desert envious. Where? Blackbeard spun around, only to find himself staring at the half-lidded expression on Rendell's face. Blackbeard groaned and threw his hands up. Why did you have to catfish me like that, bro? That's the kind of banter I expect from Sammy, but at least he can pick a time and place. Rendell's brows furrowed, looking over his shoulder and staring at the angel, which to his knowledge hadn't spoken a single word in the entire time he'd been present, before turning back to Blackbeard and shaking his head, dismissing the thought he held. Captain, you have yet to actually explain your orders. Huh. Blackbeard blinked, then made a small O shape with his mouth, nodding his head. Simple, isn't it? There's a big hole in her ship, which means the hag will have to find somewhere she can land and make repairs. He smirked, gesturing over his shoulder towards the islands they were closing in on, which means they'll likely have landed on one of these. Even if that sad man can use the huff and puff sword, they'll still have been in bad enough condition to have to land at the first island they saw. Rendell stared long and hard at the man, slowly raising his eyebrow. I do not know if should be concerned or amazed at the seemingly intellectual mind you hide behind this veil of stupidity. Thanks, Blackbeard beamed. I try. Rendell looked the man up and down, as if trying to discern his intentions before releasing a sigh and turning away from the man. His eyes traveled upwards to find the angel staring down at him. The two of them engaged in a stare down before Rendell broke contact and continued to walk through the ship. Blackbeard hummed to himself as he looked around, soon pausing as he felt something crawl up his spine. I feel like something is going to happen soon. I would very much like to complain about this. Orion pleaded loudly as Sanora held the bear in her hands, very much so. It's fine, darling, Artemis reassured him with a wave of her hand. You'll be great. I have faith that you'll look cool. I'll look like a splatter mark. Orion cried back in horror. Artemis. I'll hold back, Havel grunted in a manner which could very easily have been misunderstood to be calming. Orion was currently too panicked to be fully convinced of that fact as the berserker mounted the large club on his shoulder and gripped it tightly with both hands, turning their body to the side and getting into a very worrying position. A batter's position. Using a heroic spirit as a baseball. Romani shook his head in disbelief. In fact, using Orion as a projectile feels as though it's ironic in some strange way. At least this will make for an interesting report, right, director? Olga gave the man a blank look before turning her head back towards the screen as Havel took several practice swings. Master Fujimaru. The boy snapped to attention. Yes, director? How confident are you in this plan? 70%. Ritsuka replied after a beat, maybe 72. That isn't 100%. Orion exclaimed in a very horrified voice. Lady, please don't do this. He begged Sanora. The woman stared at the bear and then looked towards Artemis with a slightly timid expression. It's all right, darling, Artemis replied with a carefree tone. Even if you get hurt, I'll just nurse you back to health. You're hoping I get hurt now? Orion struggled. Stop. Ash walked towards the bear and the lancer, removing his hand from his bottomless box and revealing a bulky ring which he then placed in the bear's hands. Hold this. It should mitigate some of the damage to you. Really? Oh, yes. Ash nodded. I was once punched by a giant god and was back on my feet without much concern moments later because of this ring. So I won't feel it, you will not feel the full effects. Alright. Orion shakily exhaled. Let's get this over with. Archer, Ritsuka looked to the servant, can you see them yet? I can just about make them out. Archer nodded his head. They're at least 3 kilometers away from us. The tanned servant slowly turned his head towards them. It depends how far you can launch Orion without him being spotted. We'll wait till we're closer. Drake ordered. Once we're close enough that all of us can open fire, we'll send the little guy flying. This is making it so much worse, Orion whimpered. The tension is going to ruin me. I don't care anymore. As long as someone holds me in their bosom I can do it. He shouted out to the sky, preferably bowed. He cut himself off at the burning glare he received from Artemis and, surprisingly, Sanora. You have been granted a great privilege in being the consort of a goddess. Sanora sternly talked down to the bear, spinning him around so she could hold him at eye level. I will not have you insult Milady Artemis' honor by openly flaunting your infidelity. Sorry, miss. Orion looked down. You know, you're pretty cute when you look angry. Sanora sputtered, her cheeks dusting with a tint of redness, although whether it was from anger or embarrassment was difficult to tell. Did you not listen to a word I just said? Boudica walked over to Ash and leaned towards him. Did that ring actually protect you from being punched by a giant? She whispered to him with a suspicious expression. It felt marginally less painful. Ash whispered back to her, and I was indeed back on my feet, after a large helping of Estus to repair my broken body. Boudica gave him a conspiratorial smile. You lied, huh? I omitted. Ash shrugged, his expression still blank save the slight twitch of his lip. The ring will still protect him. Besides, he seems much calmer with the knowledge that he now has some form of protection. He would have continued to argue and waste time. Boudica raised an eyebrow at him, her smile not disappearing as she crossed her arms. HMMMH. I am not being vindictive. Ash argued. It is simply that pain is a great teacher and this might encourage him to better keep his lecherous opinions in check so as to not distract others. He turned to walk away before pausing. Besides, he will most likely live anyway, so where is the problem? Nowhere. Boudica gave an amused hum. giving Orion one last glance, still being shaken by Sanora with Artemis also looking ready to throttle him, before looking back to Ash. Nowhere at all. What do you mean, a bad feeling? Mary stared at Blackbeard with a raised eyebrow. Do you mean something bad is going to happen or that you feel nauseous? I mean like something bad is going to happen. Blackbeard frowned, scratching his beard with a thoughtful expression, like, wait, can servants even get nauseous? I do every time I'm around you. Anne muttered to herself. Teach recoiled as if struck, his eyes looking like they were going to tear up. That hurts my feelings, you know, he sniffed, then did a complete tonal shift. Please say it more often, except have this disdainful look on your face like you've stepped in something particularly disgusting and say it all. You're pathetic, in an ice-cold voice with glassy eyes. He paused then added on, if you could also step on me while doing so, that would be nice too. I'm quite certain I have never met a man quite so perverse as yourself. Lautrec mumbled, reaching up and scratching his helm, and I feel blessed that I had lasted quite so long without meeting one. Tisk. Teach clicked his tongue. Sammy understands me, don't you Sammy? He looked up. The eyes of everyone else looked towards the floating angel. The being craned its blackened hood down to stare at the group in silence for a few seconds before looking away from them. See, Teach boasted with a confident smile, what did I tell you? They didn't say anything. You all just don't have the same close bond relationship that I have. Blackbeard scoffed, crossing his arms and pouting. Sometimes I wonder if I'm truly the only sane man in the world. I dread to think of any world where you are its only sane man. Half-Light remarked with a disturbed expression, perhaps if everyone else had hollowed first. I'm sensing a complete lack of team spirit from some of you all. He waved his hands in the air. Just try to imagine what we're fighting to obtain here. The Grail? Well, yeah, but mainly Uriali-chan. This is not a matter of, Rendell stepped forwards, only to pause when he heard a splash next to the ship. The entire group of servants as one immediately turned their head in the direction of the splash. Blinking once, Blackbeard strode over to the railings and peered over the edge, staring down at the ripple in the water from where something had impacted it. Did anyone drop something? Huh. Ritska squinted his eyes as he stared in the direction where Orion had been launched. For a bear, he flew pretty good. Sounded like he was screaming. Sanora scratched her upper lip before frowning lightly, turning her head towards Ash. I thought that ring was supposed to negate the damage. I said it would hurt less. Ash responded with a blank expression. Not that it still wouldn't hurt. Although given that my own tolerance for pain dramatically exceeds yours, it is highly likely that he is still in incredible pain. How does he even feel pain to begin with? Ritska wondered aloud. He's a stuffed animal. Does he actually have nerves to feel anything with? Mash blinked once, her own expression slowly turning into a puzzled one. I don't know, Senpai. Perhaps because his body is a direct product of Artemis. Divine spirits do utilize magic rather than magecraft. There's a difference? It's more in line with the spells that Ash-san uses. Mash explained. Although I'd imagine it's better seen with the other branches of magic. She turned her head towards the saber, isn't it? It is. Miracles and sorcery, Havel growled, have a greater degree of flexibility to them than pyromancy. But pyromancy is far simpler to understand. Regardless, I suspect we will soon be spotted now that we have safely launched Orion. Is it truly safe, if he was still injured? David commented. It's safe for Fujimaru-kun. Romani replied with a shrug, that makes it safe for everyone else. Considering Artemis is technically the holder of the spirit core, I'd wager that Orion can take an exceeding amount of damage. As long as Lady Artemis does not feel a need to seek retribution on his behalf, we are quite safe. Oscar remarked before pausing. Although once he attempted to flirt with Sir Sanora, she seemed to change her approach almost entirely. Gods are fickle. Archer offered as way of an excuse as he held out his left hand, manifesting a large black bow before Ash brought out a similarly ludicrously sized bow, pulling out a slightly smaller wooden longbow and handing it to Oscar along with a large collection of arrows. Alright, so we've got the artillery team ready. She paused when she noticed Uriali with a bow. Seriously? I'm still an archer servant. Uriali huffed. Besides, even if my combat abilities are poor, if it's just the act of distraction, I can do that much. Besides, I feel a strong desire to teach that lousy pervert a lesson. Archer glanced at Ash. No comment about that. The gods are not adherent to the same principles as I am. Ash commented, his lip twitching downwards as he knocked a large spear arrow into the bow. Besides, I have long since come to terms that they favor their own personal desires. Even if I do not like it. Yes, well, Archer grunted, knocking his own bow, the gods are troublesome like that. You know we're right here, right? Euryale stared at Archer and Ash with a mild frown. I can literally hear every word you're saying. Same, Artemis pouted, I'm not troublesome. Unless it's with someone other than Darling, but they probably deserve it. I'm not going to comment on that, just fire when ready, Drake shrugged. Senpei. Mash whispered to Ritsuka. Do you think Orion-san is alright? Havel-san looked like he hit him pretty hard. I do feel a little bad about it, but I'm sure he's fine. Ritsuka reassured, giving a confident nod. Either way, it's the best plan we actually have at the moment. Looking to the shielder, he gave her a half smile. It'll work out, if not, he slowly looked over to where Artemis was, it's only on my head. I'm telling you, it was definitely a splash. Blackbeard argued, still leaning over the railings and staring down at the water, like something hitting the water as well. Maybe it was a fish? Lautrec guessed with a shrug, they sometimes jump out of the water, right? They do? Rendell blinked, I'd never heard of that. The ones near the streams did so. That's salmon. Anne pointed out, and I don't think you get salmon in the ocean. Do you? She framed the question towards Mary. The smaller girl looked up at her and raised an eyebrow in questioning. I don't know the behavior of fish, Anne. I grew up in a city, so I cannot tell you. Halflight shrugged. It might well have been a fish of some variety, but it could also have been. Incoming. Rendell screamed at the top of his lungs, tackling Blackbeard away from the railings just in time for a larger splash to go off just a few feet from the ship. The explosion rocked the ship and sent the servants stumbling about the deck trying to reorientate themselves. Shit. Blackbeard scrambled to his feet, staring over the railings and catching sight of the familiar outline of the Golden Hind approaching them at great speed. The man's lips quirked into a savage grin. Attacking at the crack of dawn. Gotta hand it to you. You're certainly gutsy, you old hag. Spinning away from the railings, Blackbeard willed the ship to turn in the direction of the Golden Hind, a savage smile still playing on his lips as the vessel went hard to starboard. Anne, Archer, Halflight scowled at the man obviously forgetting his name, start to openness. The moment we're in range, I'm going to deploy my noble Fa. An explosion cut him off, the fireball tearing through the side of the ship and causing the entire vessel to lurch heavily to one side. The shockwave from the immediate explosion sent Halflight and Anne spinning through the air, the two having been the closest to the initial explosion, and slamming heavily into the deck. Black smoke erupted from the now gaping hole in the port side of the ship. Blackbeard spun around and blinked several times. As he stared at the burning hole in his ship, report, he demanded. Mary rushed over to the hole and stared down into it before loudly cursing and spinning around to face the rider. The ammo ignited. The girl announced with a grimace, it's burning away. How the heck did they manage that? Blackbeard asked with genuine confusion. Rendell rushed towards the side of the ship and starboard side of the ship and scanned the water before he spotted something, his lips twitching into a deep frown. A saboteur. The king grimly revealed, squinting his eyes, although I had not thought to see something like this. Like what? Blackbeard shouldered past him and stared, blinking once, twice and then a third time as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Is that a teddy bear? It won't hurt, my ass, Orion loudly cursed as he sprinted across the surface of the water as fast as his feet could carry him. Thought I saw that damn scorpion for a second there. The bear stared down at the steel rein he was still holding in his hands. Next time he can wear this damn thing and get punted like a catapult, see how he likes it. While Orion was busy cursing the existence of everything which currently related to the great deal of pain his hide was in, including the ability to actually feel pain of that scale despite being a stuffed animal, he failed to notice the Queen Anne's Revenge bank hard to starboard so that it was facing his back before the ship sailed forwards. A distant crack of gunfire followed by something splashing into the water barely a foot from him had the bear let out another panicked shout and sped up towards the Golden Hind. Oi! Oi! Cover fire! Cover fire! The crew Golden Hind stared at the billowing smokestack currently rising into the air, the Queen Anne's Revenge sailing towards them while trailing behind the thick black smog from the destruction of most of its ammo. "Won't they be able to fire again soon?" Ritska asked with a slight hint of worry. "If they're like Arash, can't they make more cannonballs?" "It isn't the same." Romani disagreed. "Well, technically it is because it's ammunition, but at the same time it isn't." Blackbeard still kept a physical stash of his ammunition on his ship in case of being attacked and destroyed, which still does damage to his actual ship itself. While they could use the magical energy of the Grail to repair the damage and produce more ammunition. Having the Grail provides you with near unlimited mana, but it doesn't change your ability to channel it. Olga explained, an example would be having a tap attached to a dam. Turning on the faucet doesn't immediately mean the dam is going to run dry. It just means that you have an excess of water to call upon. The woman paused before continuing on, seeing the look of understanding on Ritska's face. While the enemy rider does not have to worry about running out magical energy to generate new ammunition or repairs to his vessel, it doesn't speed up the process of creating it. "Oh." Rituska nodded his head. "Yeah, that makes sense." He turned back towards the direction of the Queen Anne's Revenge before frowning as he stared at the water. "Is that Orion coming back?" Mash squinted her eyes. "I believe it is Senpei. It means he was able to get away safely." "That's darling for you," Artemis cooed, making a heroic getaway. "I think I can hear him shouting." Ritska leaned forwards, trying to catch on to what Orion was shouting about. "What's he saying?" Ritska cupped his ear at the distant shouts. Ash stood next to him and furrowed his brows. "I believe he wants to be covered in fire." Ash frowned. "I'm not certain why though." "Covering fire." Archer supplied, drawing back his bow and preparing an arrow. "He wants covering fire." "I don't know what that is. Just loosen some arrows at the boat." "Ah, I see." Ash nodded his head, planting the large bow into the deck of the ship and pulling back the steel wire as far as it would go to the point where it began to audibly creak. The unkindled focused on the ship before releasing the spear arrow at tremendous speeds towards the oncoming vessel. The spear arrow slammed into the belt of the ship and once again skidded off the wood, however this time it left a noticeable mark in the wood. Then confirms his noble phantasm gets stronger the more servants are present on it. Archer commented as he loosened half a dozen arrows in a short duration of time. Flashes of light danced between the two ships as the archers and gunners on either side opened up in full. The Queen Anne's Revenge clearly taking the majority of the fire and yet continued to sail strong. A testament to the sheer endurance of the ship when supported by multiple servants. "Brace for impact." Drake cackled as she twirled the wheel, banking the ship to port and sailing so as to graze the side of the oncoming ship. "Get those boarding anchors ready." A lance of light shot across the sky before being met with a long sword. Rendell parried the projectile upwards while his arms protested at the force behind the arrow. Narrowing his eyes, he scanned the ship and quickly scowled. They appear to have increased their number. "That sucks." Blackbeard pouted. "No fair. How come they get all this help?" "Fine." He threw up his hands, prepared to board. "Board?" Rendell gaped at the man, looking away long enough to show clear shock before his expression turned strained as he parried another arrow of light. The beam dissipated in front of him as half-light rushed past and loosened another dozen arrows towards the Golden Hind. "Are you mad? They outnumber us nearly 2-1. "For now." Blackbeard, looking away. "Sammy." The angel turned to stare down at him. "Bring out Mikey." Nodding its head, the angel's hands clasped together before its body began to glow. "Almost there," Drake muttered to herself as the ships came alongside each other. "Boarding party." Several servants swung ropes across with grappling hooks. The metal prongs buried themselves into the wooden deck of the ship before the boarding plank was lowered, slamming down onto the main deck of Blackbeard's ship. "The old bastard is mine," Drake exclaimed loudly as she rushed down the stairs and towards the ramp, her hand already clasping her flintlock. "Teach him to call me a hag. I'll have his head swinging from the front of my ship." Ritska blinked at the violent declaration before looking to Mash. The shielder shrugged her shoulders in an equal display of puzzlement before Ritska steeled his expression. "Remember, Sammy is our priority." Havel rushed past him, his heavy footfalls clumping as the servant leapt across the two ships and slammed into the deck with a heavy thud, soon being followed by the other servants as they all similarly boarded the ship in a rush. A stare down erupted as the two groups faced off against each other. Back so soon, old hag? Blackbeard snickered, I thought you'd still napping. I know that old folks can't whoa. Leaning to the side, Blackbeard narrowly dodged the bullet which had made to take his head off, the man shrugging his shoulders in response. Straight to it then, huh? You know it. Drake rushed towards Blackbeard after releasing a war cry while Blackbeard responded in kind. Stormruler collided with the frayed blade. Ash and Halflight glared into each other's eyes before the unkindled pushed the man backwards, pulling the greatsword back and then thrusting it towards the man's gut. Halflight rolled to the side before sweeping his arm towards Ash. The trail of lightning-infused light sparked along the ground and was soon followed by the spears erupting from the deck. Ash rolled to the side, the attack rushing past him and through the middle of the group of servants. Asterios let out a yelp as one of the light spears thrust itself through his foot and then soon began to electrocute him. Closing the distance between the two of them, Ash thrust his left hand forwards in an explosion of fire. The cloud of flame had Halflight recoil from the heat and release an annoyed hiss before he flipped backwards, barely a second too soon as Ash's sword pierced through the deck where he had last been. Grunting, Ash ripped the blade free of the ship and pursued after the man. Space above Halflight's shoulders glowed as brilliant orbs manifested themselves into glowing spearheads and launched themselves in several directions across the deck. The projectiles were deftly avoided by the more observant servants while Sanora growled in pain as one of the electrified spears slammed into her side. Rendell made use of the distraction to slam the pummel of his sword into the side of the woman's helm and follow the attack up with sweeping kick to her gut from the opposite side. The woman released a pained wheeze as the attack launched her onto her back with a heavy thud. The Night King deftly rolled away to avoid being crushed by Havel, the bishop releasing a growl and charging down the man. Hooking the smaller blades towards the hilt of Stormruler around the frayed blade, Ash jerked the sword to the side before swinging his head forwards like a battering ram. This time, Halflight responded in kind and slammed his own forehead into Ash's. The two recoiled from each other in response to the impact, Ash being the first to recover and striking Halflight in the side of the face with the back of his left arm. The man stumbled with the blow before Ash leveled the tip of his greatsword at the man and released a jet of wind directly into him. The sudden gale force winds sent the man careening through the air before he slammed face first into the mast of the ship and slumped down, dazed from the impact. Rushing forwards, Ash grasped Stormruler with both hands and swung the sword towards the man's neck. A gunshot and the sound of metal striking metal was all the warning he got before he found the angle of his sword's descent reversed as it was forced upwards and buried into the wooden mast. His eyes quickly darted over to see the blonde woman twirl her rifle before deftly dodging David as the man narrowly avoided braining her with the staff in his hands. His eyes quickly shifted back to Halflight just as the man snapped up to him. The spear of Filianor slammed the heel of his boot into Ash's gut and used the force behind the kick to roll backwards. The kick wrenched Ash's sword free from his grasp and left it buried in the ship. The spear clasped his hand onto his katana and rushed towards the seemingly unarmed unkindled. Ash's hand clasped onto the aquamarine dagger on his belt and unsheathed it just in time to raise it high to block the swipe aimed at bifurcating him. Halflight glared into Ash's eyes, the temptation of violence almost proving too much for him before he composed his breathing. The words of Rendell still ringing in his head. You swing your sword like a beast possessed. Rendell bluntly stated as he watched Halflight train. The sting of his earlier defeat against the unkindled still burned within him. And watching you train now with such skill only worsens the sight. What would you know, undead? Halflight bit back a retort, I will see the unkindled brought to justice. Not if you fight him full of anger you won't. Rendell grunted, crossing his arms in front of his chest and leveling Halflight with an utterly unimpressed look. I could tell that the moment you launched yourself from the ship like a hollow, you were destined for defeat and had it not been for the intervention of your allies you would have surely perished. Halflight bristled at the insinuation, now fully facing the king with a burning glare. Rendell's response to the glare was a cool look. The archer stomped over to the king, staring up at the slightly taller man with a burning fire in his eyes. If you expect me to remain civil in the face of a wanton butcher. Wanton. Rendell raised an eyebrow. From what I could hear, your charge meant nothing more than a means to an end. He did not revel in the destruction of a city, nor did he dance through rivers of blood like a creature. The knight's lip twitched. That is the difference between you and the unkindled. He does not allow sentiment to guide his blade. Because he knows he would lose otherwise. That is nothing to boast of. Half-Light sneered in disgust. I took great pride in my service to the Princess Filianor. I saw it as my calling to remain behind even after we lost contact with my home of Ulasil. That is very noble of you to remain behind in the face of personal tragedy. Rendell admitted with a note of respect. Your duty as a spear of the church clearly meant a great deal to you, which is why it pains me so to see you throw this respect away like trash. How dare! Rendell cut him off with a shove, swiftly followed by a sweeping kick which brought the archer flat on his back. He made to stand up only to find the tip of Rendell's sword pointed at his throat, the knight's expression full of visible disappointment. All it took were a few choice comments for you to loosen your guard. Shaking his head, the saber leaned away and sheathed his blade. Had you been in control, you likely would have recognized my intent with ease, not that I made much of an effort in hiding it. Grinding his teeth, Half-Light glared up at the saber. What is your point? He eventually growled out. Rendell stared at him with a crinkled expression before shaking his head. If you cannot discern my objective when I have made it obvious, then perhaps I have misjudged your skill. Scoffing, the saber turned away from him. Remember this when you next face the unkindled you so desperately wish to slay, for what little killing him is worth now. Half-Light watched the man depart with a sullen glare still aimed at his back before his focus fell upon the katana in his hands. His grip tightened around the handle to the point his knuckles turned white. The man exhaled loudly, struggling to get his breathing under control. It was easier said than done to remain calm in the face of a man who had taken away the only thing he had left that was valuable to him. Taking a deep breath, Half-Light disengaged from Ash and danced backwards, sliding to a halt and tensing his body as he watched the unkindled. His eyes turned calculative as he scanned the pattern of the attacks. Like when they had jeweled in life, the unkindled was most definitely his physical superior and was more than willing to make use of their flames as a distraction or an attack. It meant he would have to play it safe. His eyes briefly flickered away from the unkindled and towards the rest of the ship. The crew were already engaged in duels of their own. Noticing how they had separated Anne and Mary from each other with the Astoran knight chasing down the younger girl while the green-haired man fought Anne, Half-Light pursed his lips and glanced back at the unkindled as they stared at him with a cold expression. Loath as he was to admit it, perhaps Rendell held some point. The unkindled was approaching this fight like he had when they first fought. It truly meant nothing to him. Perhaps that was the difference indeed. Half-Light exhaled, twisting his body and holding the frayed blade with two hands parallel to his head and pointed forwards. The unkindled continued to watch him without so much as twitching before they took a single step forwards. Half-Light immediately thrust his arm forwards. The trail of spears erupted from the ground heading straight for the unkindled. Ash rolled to the left so the spears passed him by. Half-Light sheathed his sword and drew his bow, knocking an arrow and bathing it in blue light before it became invisible and loosening it across the ship. Oscar let out a yelp of pain as the arrow struck him in the sword arm. The knight recoiled from the blow just before Mary slid to a halt and swirled on her heel, slashing across his knee and dropping him to the ground. When she went for the head, the Astoran parried the blow away and crawled back to get some distance. Mary went to chase him down before the tanned servant with two swords rushed her, instantly forcing her on the back foot as he let loose a vicious assault. Knocking yet another arrow, he loosened it across the deck and struck Havel in the joint of the knee. The berserker stumbled, which Rendell took full advantage of, thrusting his sword towards the berserker's elbow joint and catching him between the plates. Havel thrust his shield forwards, forcing Rendell to break off and spin away to avoid being run through by Sanora's attempt at skewering him. A grunt of exertion had Half-Light dismiss his bow in an instant and unsheath his sword, spinning around and raising it high to block the downward slash from the unkindled saber. A great sword which looked to be made of molten metal slammed into the blade and locked against it. The two engaged in a staring match before Ash shoved the weapon downwards, exposing Half-Light's chest. Ash's left fist slammed into his gut with the force of a hammer. Half-Light's eyes bulged as a cough erupted from his throat. Stumbling backwards, he leaned his head to the side and cringed as a dagger slashed open his cheek, which was preferable to taking his whole head, and once again danced away from the saber. Sheathing the aquamarine dagger, Ash stared at Half-Light with a focused expression as he raised the new sword. Half-Light recognized the blade as the one which the unkindled had used to obliterate the sails earlier. I had not used this blade out of the danger of damaging the ship I stood upon. Ash commented as he raised his left hand and placed it upon the flat of the blade. I have no such compunctions about this vessel. He flicked his hand across the blade. Fire soon danced across its surface, consuming the sword. Ash moved his left hand to grasp the handle of the greatsword and lean his body forwards. The unkindled charged forwards, swinging the blade high with the sword still coated in deep orange flames. Half-Light widened his eyes and rolled to the side just as the sword made contact with the deck, releasing an explosion of chaos fire which had the man recoiling away. Ripping the greatsword clean, Ash hunched his body forwards and brought the blade across in a sweeping arc while releasing another burst of demonic flames towards the archer. Half-Light slammed his hand into the deck, instantly manifesting a wall of glowing spears of light in between himself and the wave of fire. The deep orange flames washed against the defense with a heavy crash. Ash's lip twitched before he pulled the greatsword back, the tip glowing with white light before he thrust it forwards in a thin beam of light which burst through the wall. Half-Light slashed his sword upwards as the beam broke through, slicing through the light and sending the two halves either side of him as they dissipated. Those were not normal flames. Half-Light stated, his own expression a mix of shock and horror. You infused your sword with the rumored chaos? It is the embers of the original materials rather than personal preference. Ash admitted with a shrug. The fire of the demons is potent in its use and I am not one to spurn an advantage. He took a single step forwards, his sword igniting in chaos fire. It is controlled well enough. See controlled. Half-Light spat in disbelief. Are you insane? The chaos exists because it could not be controlled. I have no desire to birth demons with it. Ash cut him off with a frown. I simply use the flames as they are. No, I see you for the fiend you truly are now. Half-Light growled, tightening his grip on his sword. A man who would so easily wield the chaos flames is not one I can allow to live, regardless of your crimes. Very well. Ash replied without much thought. Loathe me all you like, if that should make you feel more comfortable. I held my duty, you held yours. They conflicted, such is the way of life. Such a simple excuse. Half-Light scoffed, eyes flickering between the burning sword and the rest of the ship before heading back to Ash. But if that is how you wish to see life, so be it. I will defeat you as my duty to Princess Filianor demands. And I shall defeat you as my duty as Ritzka's servant demands. Ash replied with a nod. Once again, our duties conflict. Once again. But this time, Half-Light launched himself forwards. I shall not fail. Rendell rolled backwards as the halberd slammed into the spot where he had been. Lashing out with his left hand he grasped hold of the cross spear and yanked it forwards. Sanora stumbled with the pull only to jerk backwards when Rendell slammed his elbow into the face of the helm. His eyes fell back onto the two berserkers, Hubble taking the more cautious approach while the bull ripped their halberd free of the deck and took several panels of wood with them. Rendell didn't so much as balk at the display, or the 3-on-1 he was facing. He quickly jerked his sword and parried away another arrow of light and quick stepped to the side so as to get out of line of sight of the white-haired woman with the glowing arrows. The 4-on-1 would be more accurate. His advantage being that Havel was too slow, Asterios was too brutish and Sanora was less skilled than he. Despite that, she remained his greatest threat. If given the opportunity, she would hamper him and soon he would become easy pickings. Space tore open behind Asterios. The bull servant swung around just in time for Sammy to unleash a fireball into his chest. The explosion rocked the servant and sent him skating backwards across the deck of the ship, fully revealing itself in all its glory. The wings stretched wide as its hood looked between Sanora and Havel. Asterios growled as he pulled himself back to his feet, a large scorch mark present on his torso from taking a fireball to the gut. Space tore open behind him. A second black gate emerged only for a deep black orb to slam into the berserker's back and cause him to let out a more pained scream as he lurched forwards. Asterios. Euryale's panicked voice carried over from her place on the ship, swinging her bow over to the direction of the Minotaur before freezing as the angel emerged from the gate. The goddess blinked as her eyes danced between the angel behind Asterios and the angel currently facing off against Sanora and Havel. Ritzka widened his eyes as he stared at the sudden arrival of the second angel, identical to Sammy. Doctor. Mash called into the communicator, confirming presence of second angel-type servant. I read it too. Wait. Romani trailed off, His voice hitching. That isn't an illusion at all. These readings are confirming the presence of 2 of the angel-type servants. Their readings haven't changed at all. It's as if it just copied and pasted itself. Doesn't matter right now. Ritska stated, Mash, help Asterios against the second angel. He pointed towards it. Try and cover for him. He turned up towards Artemis and Euryale. Can you try and focus on the other Rendell and the other angel? Try and keep them distracted. Alright. Artemis instantly locked onto the saber. Seeing so many of my arrows blocked is quite infuriating anyway. She loosened the arrow of light towards the back of Sammy. The angel swung around and outstretched his hand. A small black gate appeared in front of his palm with a second one appearing behind Havel's head. Too late, Artemis realized his intentions as the arrow shot through the gate in front of his palm and instantly re-emerged from the second gate behind Havel, slamming into Havel's back and causing the berserker to stumble forwards with the force of the attack. Ritska stared at the display with wide eyes. Alright. This might be a little harder than I thought, he muttered, looking back at Artemis. Focus entirely on Rendell then. A crash and a bright light had Ritska turn his attention to the far deck of the ship, only to balk when he saw Ash swinging around a burning sword towards the enemy servant. Ritska grit his teeth. One wrong swing and Ash might end up hitting someone. Boudica. Ritska called through the link, help Ash against the enemy servant. The moment he got an affirmative from the rider, he activated the link again. Ash, try and keep the flames to a minimum, we don't want to set the ship on fire with everyone still on it. Ah. He watched as the saber halted momentarily as if in realization before they continued on, the sword still burning but no longer throwing around blasts of fire in all directions. My apologies. Ritska rolled his eyes before he realized something. Where's Assassin? He got his answer when the bronze-armored man rushed onto the scene, making a beeline straight for Mash. Mash. Behind. The shielder wasted no time in following the order, sliding to a halt and raising her shield just in time to hear the clang of metal as Assassin's shuttle rebounded off her shield. The man skipped backwards to get some distance as he scanned the shielder over, twirling the curved swords in his hand. Ritska scanned the battlefield with a troubled look. Despite outnumbering the enemy servants, he could tell this was going to be a tough battle. And tough combat. Half-Light even gets the shonen flashback for that extra power-up. Also Mash gets a little one-to-one with Oscar, because poor Oscar is getting bullied so far. He'll get his moment to shine, probably, anyway. I believe I owe you some stats, so here we are with Half-Light. We'll cover Lautrec in the next chapter. Half-Light, Spear of the Church Servant, Archer Strength, D. Endurance, D. Agility, B. Mana, B. Luck, B. Noble Phantasm, C. Frayed Blade, C. Anti-Unit, Max Target, 1, Max Range, 1 to 2. Hokurobito, Blade is slashed rapidly 4 times within a short interval. Ventum Mortiferum, C. Anti-Unit, Max Target, 1, Max Range, 1 to 99. Arrows loosened by this bow are invisible to the naked eye. While they still produce sound and can be sensed, they still remain difficult to discover until they strike. Class Skills Independent Action, D. Magic Resistance, C. Personal Skills, Clairvoyance, C. Spear of the Church, B. Makes use of minor miracles of the Church of Philionor. Can create spears of divine light, either above his head or along the ground. Disengage, C. Summoning. I am Half-Light, Spear of the Church and Archer class servant. I am here to serve as your protector and warrior. Dialogue 1. You also enjoy moments of tranquility, Good, good. It is important to remember the peace you wish to fight for. One cannot live for combat at all times. Dialogue 2. There are quite a few servants about, aren't there? Myself? Oh, I am not jealous if that concerns you. It means you have ample defenders. Dialogue 3. A master and servant relationship. I believe it follows the same principles as my role as a spear. I act to defend you from all harm. Dialogue 4. If you have Ashen One, to think I would see him again. The unkindled who slew me and lay waste to the ringed city. Perhaps it might have been different in his time, but it changes nothing. It was a city of Philionor, and as long as she remained, I would always defend it, if he is here and at your command. I will avoid him. It is better that way. He might not hate me, but I cannot say the same about him. Dialogue 5. If you have Gwendolyn, I would like to offer my most profuse apologies to the god of the dark moon for failing to defend the princess. However, I cannot find the strength to stand before him. Dialogue 6. If you have Gale, another of those who desecrated the city, I know of his crimes. However, I shall stay my blade. If only because to challenge him is suicide. It would not serve you well if I were to throw my life away for the sake of revenge. Dialogue 7. If you have Philionor, the princess is here, she is awake, I must not be here. She will be most disgusted by my failure to say, Master, is that a little girl riding the great dragon Medir? Huh? Child servants. But, why is Medir so? He de-aged himself. This is most unexpected. Regardless, I am still a spear devoted to her safety. Although as I am contracted to you, your safety does take priority. Just, do not make me choose. Dialogue 8. If you have Sullivan, that fiend, that ultimate scoundrel, who? That accursed tree spirit. He took one look at me, discerned my identity and then laughed at my failure. I swear. My pride shall be avenged for this insult. Likes, what do I like? I liked my time in the Ringed City and my duty to Princess Philionor. I would say most of all, I enjoyed the days of commune. Hates, what do I hate? Scoundrels who act purely for duty with no pride in their achievements. Simple slaves to demands and nothing else. Especially those who trample over the duty of others without a care in the world. Wish for the Holy Grail. I would wish for the restoration of the Ringed City. Perhaps you could visit. I know the pygmy lords would welcome you as well. Bond level 1. You have not yet been harmed, have you? No? Good. That pleases me. To allow you any harm would be a grave personal wound upon me. Blonde level 2. I've noticed you are in frequent danger quite often, perhaps more than necessary. I'm curious, do you do so because you enjoy the thrill of battle or because you just wish to keep me in top shape? Blonde level 3. It is most bizarre, isn't it? As a spear of Philionor, I was rarely called upon to act and yet I find myself increasingly active while in service to you. I do not regard it as a bad thing, but perhaps you should spend some time away from the battlefield. Bond level 4. Another run is it? Alright. I can at least show off my archery skills as well. It's useful to polish both my sword and my bow skills so that I can better serve you. I sound more used to this, you say? Haha. Perhaps you are correct, dear me. Bond level 5. Well, I shall always remain a spear of the Church of Philionor. However, Spear of Chaldea does not have an unpleasant ring to it. Ha ha ha. I might have gotten carried away there. But it is a genuine pride I feel in serving you. Perhaps not as much as serving the princess, but to feel this much pride serving you is not something to be scoffed at. Birthday. A birthday is it? I wish you my most heartfelt congratulations. During an event, I sense something occurring outside. You can participate if you wish. As your spear I will prepare myself to follow. First ascension. I feel a little stronger. That is good, I can defend you better. Second ascension. Another increase in power. Most prudent. It would not do for your defender to be weak. Third ascension. Well, this is most comforting now. Another increase and yet I feel closer to completion still. Can it be that there is more improvement? Fourth ascension. I shall remain your spear, for as long as I am your servant. So for you to have this much faith in me fills me with a strong belief that I should not fail in your expectations.